Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Cassy Farrington. Cassy was born on December 22, 1990, in Virginia. She was the second of 4 children to Chuck and Darlene Brooks. Cassy excelled academically and was an active student, she becoming a member of the National Honor Society and participating in sports. Her initial goal was to pursue a career in medicine. However, when Cassy turned 16, her life drastically changed. She became pregnant, which led her to change her future goals and plans. Several major changes in Cassy's life occurred in the next month. Cassy graduated from high school, gave birth to a baby, married Bradley Farrington, and moved out of her parents' house, all within a brief period, just 1 month. Several years later, she had another child. But over time, her family relationship began to deteriorate. Ultimately, the marriage ended in divorce. Despite this, she persevered, raising her 2 young children in Silver City, a small town with a population of about 10,000. At 22 years old, she worked as a nurse at the local hospital and rented a place from a coworker. As she turned 23, Cassy entered into a new relationship with a man named David Berry. He bonded quickly with her children, and she felt grateful for the way things were going good. Rather than rushing into things, they focused on building a life as a family unit. Cassy confided in her loved ones and co-workers that David had brought happiness to both her and her children, and she was hopeful that this new relationship would bring her the peace and happiness she had been missing after her previous failed marriage. On March 24, 2014, Cassy phoned her parents after finishing her night shift at the Silver City Hospital. They chatted for a few minutes, during which she shared her plan to drive home, pick up her children, and take them to school. Afterward, she intended to return home and rest for a couple of hours before picking her children up from school later that day. School staff called Cassy's parents when they couldn't reach her. Her children had finished their classes, but Cassy hadn't shown up to pick them up. Cassy's mother tried calling her, but there was no answer. Thinking Cassy might have overslept after a night shift, her mother asked Cheryl, her landlord, to check if Cassy was home and if she was okay. Cheryl went to the house and knocked on the door, but no one answered. She then walked around the house and peered through the back door window, noticing water pouring from the bathroom into the kitchen. She knocked harder on the door and shouted Cassy's name, but still got no response. With her own key, Cheryl unlocked the door and entered the house. The sound of running water was louder and more distinct. As she walked across the wet floor towards the bathroom, Cheryl called out Cassy's name, her voice shaking slightly. Then she saw Cassy. Cheryl, a coworker and friend of Cassy's, discovered her lifeless body in the overflowing bathtub. She was lying face down, wearing a house robe, as water continued to pour out. Despite Cheryl's first aid skills, she realized that Cassy had been dead for a few hours, as rigor mortis had already set in. This made CPR impossible. Cheryl immediately called 911 to report the incident. She then broke the devastating news to Cassy's parents over the phone, informing them of their daughter's passing. As Cheryl waited for the paramedics and police to arrive, she took a moment to inspect the house. She noticed that the second bathroom, located elsewhere in the house, also had an open faucet with running water. However, the hub there had an overflow protection, so the excess water wasn't running onto the floor but going down the drain. Cheryl also observed that the towel rack in the bathroom had been pulled off the wall and was lying on the floor. Upon receiving the news, Chuck and Darlene, Cassy's parents, were devastated. They stopped everything they were doing and traveled from Arizona to Silver City. Within a few hours, they arrived at the house, where their daughter's body had been found. The police were already on the scene, investigating the circumstances surrounding Cassy's death. The officers observed that there was no sign of forced entry into the house, as all the locks were still in place, the the windows were closed, and the glass was intact. Additionally, valuables in the house were still intact, so the possibility of robbery was unlikely. The local sheriff questioned Chuck and Darlene, asking if Cassy had any intention of committing suicide and if she had any reason for doing so. However, Chuck and Darlene firmly dismissed this idea and declared that there was no way Cassy would do such a thing. The police chief repeatedly told Cassy's parents that she had likely taken her own life, as if he was trying to convince them of that fact. However, Cassy's parents found the police investigation to be rushed and confusing. Normally, the scene of the case is thoroughly examined and investigated, a process that can take several days. In Cassy's case, the police left the scene just a few hours after her body was found, and they informed Cheryl that she was allowed to enter and use the house. This worries Cassy's parents, and they decide to investigate the house themselves. After finding water still in the bathtub, they emptied it and discovered black streaks on the sides of the tub that resembled the marks left by rubber-soled shoes. They also found Cassy's glasses, hairband, and a coat hanger in various places on the floor. Cassy's parents were even more suspicious when the police didn't take the time to search the house for fingerprints. They suspected that the authorities might be trying to close the case quickly without thoroughly investigating it. It wasn't until they contacted the district attorney's office that the police appeared to put in more effort. However, they were still unable to close the case due to the findings of the medical examiner. The autopsy report showed that Cassy had several bruises on her body, particularly around her neck. The examiner concluded that her death was a homicide. However, the investigation had difficulty by the property owner having cleaned up and made some repairs after the incident. This meant that the original crime scene had been disturbed, which could impact the investigation's progress. Cassy's parents were met with silence from the police as the months went by. The police did investigate David Berry, a man Cassy had been seen before her death, but he was quickly ruled out as a suspect due to a solid alibi. However, as time passed, Cassy's parents grew increasingly frustrated with the local police, feeling they were not doing enough to solve the case. Their concerns led Chuck and Darlene to request a meeting with the chief district attorney to voice their dissatisfaction with the handling of the investigation, specifically with Detective Jose Sanchez. After reviewing the case file, the district attorney agreed with the parents, finding that Jose had made numerous errors. As a result, Jose was removed from the case and a more experienced detective took over. From the start, Cassy's family and friends suspected her ex-husband, Bradley Farrington, was responsible for her death. At the time of Cassy's passing, Cassy and Bradley was entangled in a heated custody battle over their children. And Bradley stood to gain the most from Cassy's death because he will win custody of the child. Bradley Farrington is a former Silver City police officer who had just retired a few months before Cassy's death, and his good relationship with investigators kept him from being considered a suspect. However, Bradley had a clear motive for the crime and possessed the necessary knowledge to destroy evidence. He was well aware of police procedures and how to cover his tracks. For example, the bath water will wash away any remaining DNA evidence on the body, as well as erase shoe prints on the floor. Given Cassy's familiarity with Bradley, it's likely that she would have opened the door for him. Unfortunately, due to the poor handling of the investigation by the local police, so any evidence linking Bradley and to the crime scene was lost and could not be restored. The only remaining way to hold Bradley accountable is through eyewitness testimony. Cassy had told her parents about their family being abused by Bradley, and that he often acted arrogant because he was a police officer. Cassy lived in constant fear, and Bradley's friends were police officers and she couldn't turn to them for help. She had confided in co-workers about Bradley's threats, including the ominous threat that he would make her disappear without a trace. Tragically, her life was cut short, and she was found dead on March 24, 2014. 19 months later, on October 23, 2015, 28-year-old Bradley Farrington was arrested in connection with Cassy's death. Although Bradley was a suspect, the local police mishandled evidence, leaving none that directly linked him to the crime. As a result, the judge made a decision permitting previously recorded statements from Cassy to be used as testimony during the trial. During the trial, multiple witnesses testified, including Cassy's parents, friends, and co-workers, to whom she had confided about the abuse she endured at the hands of Bradley. Notable among the witnesses was Dr. Michael Hunter, a renowned forensic expert from San Francisco. With over 20 years of experience, Michael presented the jury with autopsy photographs and concluded that Cassy likely died from strangulation. Cassy had injuries to her neck, which supported that conclusion. After a warrant was issued for Bradley's arrest, Jose Sanchez, who initially handled the case, appeared in court. Jose claimed he had never considered Bradley Farrington a suspect because there was no reason to, and also testified that no fingerprints of Bradley were found at Cassy's home. The crime scene was unusually clean, Jose said. He believed the scene was cleaned after the crime was committed, which explains why no fingerprints were found. After 4.5 hours of deliberation, the jury found Bradley Farrington guilty on September 7, 2018. Bradley was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. He later filed an appeal with the New Mexico Supreme Court in 2020. Bradley appealed his conviction, claiming the trial court erred in allowing Cassy's co-workers, friends, and family members to testify in court. However, the state's highest court declared it had enough evidence to convict Bradley and friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Jorge Cortez. Jorge Humberto Martinez Cortez was born on January 5, 1978, in Mexico City. He kept his childhood and teenage years private, only sharing that he often clashed with his mother, who cared deeply for him, and his father, who rarely intervened in their arguments. Jorge's strained family relationships likely contributed to his emotional isolation and the development of his aggressive and unstable personality. To escape his difficult home life, Jorge left at a young age and embarked on a journey across Mexico, taking on temporary jobs to support himself. He worked as a waiter in various bars in Mexico City, including those in the Rosa and Cona districts, and also relied on tips from tourists in the popular Villa Du and Cuac districts, known for their extensive infrastructure and diverse entertainment options. Jorge's life of crime began in this place. In 2010, he was arrested for theft and given a 4-year prison sentence. However, because it was his first offense, the judge decided to release him on bail. At the time, no one suspected that this decision would set free a man who would later become one of Mexico's most notorious criminals. After his release, Jorge met a girl named Adriana and fell in love. Initially, he treated her with kindness and attention, but as their relationship deepened, his behavior became increasingly violent. Adriana soon found herself a victim of his physical abuse. Exhausted by his cruelty, she decided to end the relationship, but Jorge refused to accept her decision. One night, Jorge violently attacked Adriana, dragging her down the stairs by her hair and breaking her nose. He beat her so severely that she lost consciousness. When she came to, she saw Jorge holding a lighter and threatening to kill them both if she didn't stay with him. Despite his threats, Adriana continued to resist, which further enraged Jorge. He attempted to strangle her by grabbing her neck with both hands. However, Adriana managed to break free, grabbed a hammer, and began fighting back. She was able to force Jorge out of the apartment and ultimately out of her life for good. This violent confrontation occurred in 2011, and although Adriana reported the incident to the police, Jorge was released on bail and avoided punishment. In hindsight, Adriana's escape from Jorge that night saved her from a potentially deadly situation. Jorge would go on to take the lives of multiple women in the future. After meeting Jorge, 18-year-old Yang Kiang Marie became his new victim. Yang was a Korean girl who was very close to her mother, Monica, and her sisters, particularly Anna. Anna was a lively and athletic young woman who balanced her studies in psychology with a part-time job at a restaurant. Yang met Jorge at one of the bars where he worked, and they were immediately drawn to each other. After a brief courtship, they started dating, but their relationship was marked by violence. Despite their frequent arguments, they stayed together. When Yang turned 19, she decided to declare her independence from her family and move to the city with Jorge. However, this change only made their problems worse. Jorge's behavior became increasingly controlling and abusive. He constantly monitored Yang's activities, calling her every hour at work and restricting her interactions with friends. As a result, Yang felt trapped and realized she was a victim of domestic violence. However, she hid the truth from others, including her family, to avoid causing them concern. Only a few close people, including her sister Anna and some friends, knew about the situation. Despite her family's warnings and advice to leave Jorge, Yang struggled to break free. She attempted to leave him multiple times but always returned, held back by her own fears and vulnerabilities. During this time, Yang underwent a significant transformation, changing from a happy and lively person to someone who was depressed and willing to do anything to please Jorge. The relationship continued to deteriorate, becoming increasingly toxic and damaging to Yang's well-being. Yang's relationship with Jorge was marked by violent outbursts. On one occasion, Jorge refused to let Yang into their apartment when she came home late. On another, he locked her inside, set her clothes on fire, and chased her around the room in a fit of rage. In August 2014, their arguments escalated, and Yang decided to leave Jorge and move in with her parents. A friend encouraged her to report Jorge to the police and end the abuse. Although Yang initially agreed, she eventually returned to Jorge and they continued living together. Tragically, Yang's life was cut short. On September 21st, her body was discovered in their apartment, bearing signs of severe bruising. Jorge claimed to have found Yang hanging in the bedroom, stating that he had left her sleeping at noon the previous day, September 20th, after she had worked a shift at the bar. Jorge claimed that he returned home on the morning of September 21st to find Yang deceased. He immediately contacted the police and notified Yang's family of the tragic event. The news of Yang's death was devastating to her family, prompting Monica and Anna to rush to the scene. Upon arrival, they found police officers and forensic experts already at the apartment, carefully removing Yang's body from the bed. Jorge stated that when he saw his deceased wife, he became frantic and attempted to assist her. A police officer explained to the family that an investigation was ongoing and they needed to stay outside the house to protect potential evidence. As they watched, Yang's body, covered with a sheet, was carried out of the house. The police also informed them that the initial evidence suggested Yang's death was a suicide, a conclusion supported by the position of the body in Jorge's account, which the police believed to be truthful. However, Yang's family was skeptical and struggled to accept this explanation, finding it hard to believe that she would take her own life. When the family arrived to identify the body and prepare the necessary documents, they were surprised to find that the examination protocol was almost complete. The death certificate stated that Yang had died from strangulation by hanging. However, when the relatives were allowed to view the body, they noticed bruises on Yang's legs that seemed suspicious. Jorge attempted to explain the bruises by saying that the body had slipped from his hands and fallen to the floor when he tried to move it from the bed. Monica was not convinced by Jorge's explanation and suspected that something was not quite right. Investigations revealed more about Yang's tumultuous relationship with Jorge, fueling suspicion that her death might not be the suicide police claimed. During police testimony, friends described constant fighting between they, revealing Jorge's history of jealousy and aggression. His behavior extended to frequent phone calls to Yang's workplace, indicating a pattern of controlling behavior. Yang's sister Anna noted that a few months before the tragedy, her behavior dramatically shifted. Anna added that she started distancing herself from the family once the relationship with Jorge started. This prompted concern within the family. Despite growing concerns about Jorge's unstable behavior and doubts about the official explanation, the police were quick to dismiss theories and rush to close the case. Experts at the Katok morgue recommended cremating Yang's body, which meant that further forensic investigation would not be possible. Yang's mother was deeply suspicious of Jorge's involvement in her daughter's death, but she eventually agreed to the cremation due to pressure from her family, thereby giving up the chance to gather evidence to support her suspicions. Jorge did not attend the funeral, but he got a tattoo of a broken heart, supposedly to show his grief. However, he also cut off all contact with Yang's family. Yang's death had a devastating impact on her family, especially her mother, Monica. The overwhelming pain of losing her daughter, combined with feelings of loneliness and despair, led Monica to develop an addiction to alcohol and smoking. Monica was devastated when her daughter Yang passed away suddenly. Despite her overwhelming grief, Monica refused to accept the initial explanation of Yang's death, finding it contradictory to her daughter's outgoing and life-loving nature. Unsettled by details like the bruises on Yang's body and the lack of evidence supporting the claimed manner of death, Monica's instincts told her there was more to the story. To get answers, Monica launched her own investigation into the case. Monica acquired security footage from her daughter's home, revealing her son-in-law Jorge was the last person to see Yang alive. With the help of a private attorney and forensic pathologist, Monica reviewed Yang's final days. An unexpected development led to a shocking explanation, revealing a deeply seated scandal and a misclassified homicide. Monica's determination uncovered hidden details, ultimately revealing the truth behind Yang's death. The detective completely rejected the initial account of Yang's death, presenting conclusive evidence that proved she was murdered. Further investigation revealed several discrepancies with the original autopsy. There were no signs of hanging on Yang's body, but her neck showed signs of strangulation, and a scarf had been used to make it appear as though she had hanged herself. Bruises on her hands and fingernails suggested she had tried to fight back. The medical examiner confirmed that any competent expert would have reached the same conclusion. This raises serious questions. Why did the police ignore these facts, and why did the family receive a false report about their daughter's death? Monica's relentless pursuit of truth led her to conduct a 7-month investigation, uncovering a series of disturbing failures and incompetence by law enforcement agencies. Her research revealed that Yang had previously reported violence by Jorge to the police, but her cries for help were ignored. Monica also discovered that Jorge had ties to his father and the staff handling the case, which, combined with the severity of Yang's injuries and the apparent negligence of the authorities, compelled her to take decisive action. Monica appealed to the prosecutor's office, seeking a review of the case and justice for Jorge, the main suspect. However, she was met with neglect and cynicism instead of support. A prosecutor even questioned her competence, suggesting she should focus on being a housewife and seek psychological help rather than pursuing justice. Undeterred, Monica continued her investigation, driven by her love for her child and her desire for truth. Her perseverance ultimately paid off. Jorge committed another murder in 2016, a devastating end to Yang's story. This event began a new chapter in Campira's life. She met Jorge online, where he hid his dark nature behind a charming facade. Unaware of his past, she was drawn to his friendly, sociable personality, and they soon developed a romantic relationship. Campira's close friends discovered her new relationship when she posted a photo of herself and her boyfriend on social media, beaming with happiness. For several weeks, their romance seemed perfect. As 2016 drew to a close, Campira's mother, Margarita, met Jorge for the first time on December 28. Campira, Jorge, and her children then traveled to Acapulco to spend the New Year's holidays with her parents. However, Jorge later convinced Campira to extend their stay, and she asked her mother to watch the children for a few more days. Margarita agreed, unaware of the tragedy that was about to unfold. 3 days later, Campira was found dead. The last time Margarita had spoken to her daughter was on December 30th. When Margarita tried to call Campira on New Year's Eve, she was met with silence. Campira always answered her phone or returned calls promptly, so Margarita's anxiety grew with each passing minute. As the hours ticked by, Campira's unusual silence and lack of online activity only heightened Margarita's concerns. Eventually, Margarita decided to contact Jorge to find out what had happened to her daughter. Jorge attempted to alleviate Margarita's concerns by downplaying the argument and Campira departure to celebrate the new year with friends. However, Margarita remained unconvinced and asked a family friend to check on Campira. When the friend arrived at Campira's house, Jorge told him that Campira was asleep and unable to meet with him. Margarita's suspicions grew, and she sensed that Jorge was hiding something. On December 31st, between 5 o'clock and 8 p.m., Jorge committed a heinous crime. He brutally murdered Campira by strangling her after beating her severely with an unknown object, leaving multiple injuries on her face and body. In an attempt to make it appear as though Campira had taken her own life, Jorge cut a lock of her hair, placed her body on the bed, covered it with a blanket, and left the gas stove on. He even placed a portrait of Campira's late ex-husband in her hand to create the illusion that memories of him had driven her to suicide. Around 8:30 p.m., Jorge packed his belongings and left the house. On the night of January 1, 2017, Margarita tried to contact her daughter Campira to wish her a happy new year, but was unable to reach her. She then called her son Gabriel, who was in the same city as Campira, and asked him to check on her. When Gabriel arrived at his sister's house, he was immediately hit with a strong smell of gas. After turning off the gas burners, he began searching for Campira and was shocked to find her body on the couch, bearing signs of a brutal beating on her face. As Gabriel threw off the blanket covering his sister's body, he was horrified by what he saw. Campira was wearing only her underwear, and her body was covered in numerous bruises. Several details caught his attention. There were drops of blood around her, although her body in underwear appeared clean, as if she had recently bathed. Additionally, Campira's head was almost completely shaved, which struck Gabriel as strange, as his sister was known to take great care of her hair. Gabriel reported the incident to the police and then called his mother to break the news to Margarita. Paramedics and police arrived, confirmed Campira's death, and restricted access to the scene. The family was stunned by grief, struggling to come to terms with what happened. Their eyes reflected sadness and a glimmer of hope for justice. The investigation was complicated by inconsistencies between the crime scene and the initial assumption of suicide. The police meticulously examined every detail to unravel the truth. The police initially suspected suicide, but Campira's family disputed this, finding it impossible to believe that a young, cheerful woman would take such a drastic step. Campira's family was convinced that her death was not a suicide, but a violent crime. A strand of hair found on her body that did not match anyone in the house reinforced their suspicions. They demanded a more thorough investigation, which was granted. A second forensic examination confirmed their fears, revealing that Campira was strangled and that the suicide scene was staged. The evidence included marks on her trachea and neck, bruises indicating a beating, and the absence of a strand of hair. The police launched an investigation, and Campira's aunt, Sandra, worked with the deputy prosecutor to have the case transferred to the prosecutor's office. However, progress was slow. Later, Sandra was called back to the prosecutor's office and informed that she and her brother, Gabriel, could be plaintiffs in the case. Campira's children were left with their grandmother after the tragedy. To shield them from painful memories, they were transferred to a new school. However, time alone didn't heal their wounds. 2 months later, the family was allowed to visit the apartment where Campira's body was found, collecting her belongings and possibly uncovering clues. Her laptop was found, but its data had been deleted. Fortunately, her iPad was password protected, and the last photos she took before her death were recovered. One disturbing photo showed Campira lying next to Jorge on the same sofa where her body was later found. Further investigation of the photos revealed more evidence. In one image, Jorge was seen holding a skull-shaped container that was later discovered in the apartment's freezer. He was also shown strangling Campira with one hand. Drawers in the desk yielded sketches of tattoos Jorge planned to get, further hinting at his possible involvement in the crime. The public was outraged when Jorge was released on bail in 2009, sparking widespread anger. Many realized that if he had been detained earlier, the young women might still be alive. The Campira and Young families continued to demand justice for their loved ones on social media, gathering over 13,000 supporters on a memorial page. 10 months after his escape, Jorge was finally caught on October 24, 2017. His arrest was unexpected, occurring during a routine patrol by the National Civilian Police in Livingston, Guatemala. The officers were patrolling the streets when they noticed a suspicious man who appeared to be homeless. A routine check of his documents and fingerprints revealed a shocking truth: the man was on the international wanted list with a high danger level. Jorge was immediately arrested and taken to the immigration center in Guatemala City, where he was detained pending further action. The Guatemalan authorities quickly contacted their Mexican counterparts to initiate the extradition process. According to the head of the Guatemalan police, Pablo Castillo, Jorge had been hiding under a bridge in western Guatemala, living on the streets and relying on the kindness of tourists for survival. The next day, October 25, Jorge was transported to the Mexican border city of Chicas, where he was handed over to the Mexican authorities. After crossing the border, Jorge was taken to Mexico City, marking the successful completion of the extradition process and the delivery of justice. Jorge appeared in court to face charges for his alleged crimes. A reporter managed to ask him a few questions, but Jorge responded with a complete denial of any wrongdoing, claiming he was unaware of the charges against him. This was despite being taken to court on October 26 for a preventive measure, specifically for the murder of Campira. During the trial, the prosecution presented strong evidence of Jorge's involvement in the crime. The investigation revealed that Jorge had brutally beaten the victim with an unknown object before strangling her to death. The prosecutor classified the crime as a feminicide, made worse by the fact that Jorge had a romantic relationship with the victim. The prosecutor also pointed out that Jorge had a prior conviction for theft and was possibly involved in the death of another ex-girlfriend, Jan. Despite the overwhelming evidence and arguments against Jorge, his lawyer proposed an alternative explanation that Jorge was mentally unstable and needed a psychological evaluation. This move came as the community awaited justice, expecting a suitable punishment for the perpetrator. After thoroughly examining the evidence, witness testimonies, and arguments, the judge turned his attention to Jorge and his lawyer. He asked how long it would take to complete the psychological evaluation. Following a consultation, Jorge's lawyer agreed that Jorge would attend all subsequent court hearings. Upon reviewing all materials and considering both sides, the judge rendered a verdict: there was sufficient evidence from the prosecutor to hold Jorge accountable for his crimes. The court ordered the investigation to continue and gave a 4-month deadline to gather new evidence. Meanwhile, Jorge was taken into custody and held at a pretrial detention center. Despite Jorge's arrest and guilty verdict, the Campira and Jan families faced a lengthy and challenging process ahead. In August 2019, an oral hearing was held in Jorge's case. His lawyer asked the court to disregard the videos that showed Jorge entering and leaving Campura's house on the day she was murdered. They claimed that these videos were incomplete, taken from a 30-hour recording at the crime scene, and could not be used to prove Jorge's guilt. The videos had been given to the victim's family by a neighbor who recorded them. The family then passed them on to the police, who brought only partial recordings to court. The police had lost the original disc. Jorge's lawyer alleged that the Mexico City prosecutor's office had concealed this information, which only came to light on the day of the hearing. The defense lawyer argued that the materials used to obtain the arrest warrant were unlawful. Specifically, the lawyer claimed that a key video was given to the Campura family rather than the judicial authorities, and therefore could not be used as evidence. Despite this, the supervisory judge rejected the defense's petition after considering the prosecution's arguments and the testimony of Campura's friends and neighbors. Additionally, the court considered 2 witness statements, but did not accept them as evidence. The case proceeded, and Jorge was allowed to appeal the decision and present the same arguments again. Meanwhile, the young family was dealing with their own separate case. A ban on violence against women was established in Mexico City, thanks in part to advocacy from several groups, including the Mexican Institute of Human Rights and Democracy and the Center for Justice. This new decree was influenced by multiple high-profile crimes, including the murder of Jan. As a result, her case was forwarded to a Mexico City court for trial. Nearly 7 years after Yang's murder, charges were formally brought against her suspected killer, Jorge, in May 2021. Shortly thereafter, a judge ordered his arrest for his role in her murder. Despite these developments, Jorge's defense team was able to significantly slow down the investigation and prosecution. 9 years after Yang's death, Jorge Humberto Martinez Cortez was sentenced to 52 years and 6 months in prison in November 2023 for taking Yang's life. While the young family has finally received justice, Campura's family still faces a lengthy process. A trial had been scheduled for April 2022 at the detention center where Jorge was being held. Activists were resolute that this time the perpetrator would not evade accountability. Jorge's lawyers have successfully delayed the hearing once again, which was set to take place on January 29, 2024. Over 50 witnesses were expected to be called to testify, but for now, there is no update on the status of the hearing in the media. Jorge's family remains hopeful that he will eventually be held accountable for his actions. While nothing can bring Campura back, they seek justice and want to ensure that her ends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Grace Holland. Grace Holland was born on September 23, 1984, in the small town of Creve Coeur, Missouri. She grew up in a close-knit family with her parents and 2 sisters, including her twin, Laura. Together, they explored the world, played, studied, and dreamed of the future. Grace's education at a Catholic school instilled in her a sense of discipline, and her degree in criminal justice further fueled her interest in law and order. From a young age, Grace was a purposeful and responsible individual. She was drawn to the idea of helping others and upholding the law. After graduating from university, Grace got married and had 4 children, who became the center of her life. She devoted herself to caring for them, teaching them new things, and sharing her love for the world. As a proud mother, Grace often shared photos of her children with those around her and cherished every moment spent with them. However, in 2015, Grace's life took a dramatic turn. She met Robert Diaz, the head of the Maryland County Fire Department. His courageous profession and heroic image immediately caught her attention. Robert and Grace were swept up in a whirlwind of emotions. He was captivated by her beauty, intelligence, and kindness, while she admired his strength, determination, and passion for helping others. However, a dark secret lurked behind Robert's impeccable reputation. His brother, David, a former St. Louis police officer, had been charged with a serious crime in 1998. Nearly 2 decades later, David passed away, leaving behind unanswered questions and secrets. David's influence had a profound impact on Robert's life and career. As a respected police officer, David had opened doors for Robert in law enforcement, helping him advance in his career. Robert also served in a fire department and held the position of deputy president at the family company, Liberty Arts Works. The company specialized in creating memorials for fallen military personnel, firefighters, and police officers. Through his work and involvement with the Backstopper organization, which supported first responders, Robert forged strong connections in his professional network. Robert had a child from his first marriage, but the relationship ultimately ended in divorce. He then married Grace, a detective from the Maryland police, in an effort to find happiness again. This union strengthened his ties to law enforcement, and he and Grace built a life together, buying a new home and starting fresh. However, their seemingly perfect relationship soon began to unravel, revealing underlying issues. Robert's past continued to haunt him. His brother had been accused of a crime, tarnishing Robert's reputation and casting doubt on his integrity. Furthermore, cracks began to appear in his relationship with Grace. Despite their outward success, their relationship was marked by turmoil, with periods of calm punctuated by intense arguments. According to Laura, Grace's twin sister, Robert exerted significant control over Grace's life, dictating her spending habits, social interactions, and even her relationships. Laura revealed that Grace's best friend ended their relationship after a dinner with Robert, but the reason for the breakup was unclear. This development only increased Grace's feelings of isolation from her loved ones. Grace claimed that Robert forced her to quit her job and join the family business, although there was no official record of her employment. The family alleged that Robert simply instructed the company to pay her without documenting it. During this challenging time, Grace discovered she was pregnant with Robert's child. However, instead of bringing them closer together, the pregnancy increased the tension in their relationship. Their text messages, presented at the trial, revealed their conflicting desires. Grace wanted to keep the child and repair their relationship, while Robert was ready to end things. Court documents provided by the Holland family were shocking. Robert offered to pay Grace $1,600 to have an abortion, wanting to get rid of the child. However, an unexpected event occurred in the summer of 2020 in Missouri, the tragic death of 35-year-old Grace Holland. The suspicious circumstances surrounding Grace's death have left her family and the people of St. Louis determined to investigate further. As the government remained silent, distrust of the official story grew. Grace's mother faces accusations, which only strengthens the family's resolve to uncover the truth. The investigation started slowly at first, but after a lawsuit was filed and evidence was found, the case gained momentum, crossing state lines and captivating the entire country. Public opinion demands a fair verdict. On October 29, 2021, Laura Holland, Grace's sister, posted a heartbreaking letter on the police department's Facebook page. In it, she revealed that Grace had been living in fear of her husband Robert's aggressive behavior and had sought help from the Maryland Fire Department on June 24, 2020. Grace had secretly recorded one of their arguments, which later became evidence of their abusive relationship. On the recording, Robert can be heard insulting Grace, saying he didn't want to be with her. Robert was furious with Grace, accusing her of being lazy while he worked hard. In an attempt to calm him down, Grace confessed her love for him, but this only made Robert angrier. He eventually left her, leaving Grace alone with feelings of bitter loneliness and deep emotional pain. However, the situation seemed to have taken a turn for the better by July 21. At around 10 p.m., Robert and Grace took a photo together, lying on their bed in their new home. Both of them were smiling, and it seemed like they were trying to put their argument behind them. But this moment of peace was short-lived. 2 days later, on July 23, 2020, at 11:53 p.m., Robert called the emergency services, sobbing uncontrollably as he reported that his fiancée had shot herself. Paramedics rushed into the house to find Grace lifeless on the floor. The cause of her death was determined to be a gunshot wound to the head, resulting in instant death. However, the results of the autopsy, released on September 17, 2020, revealed a surprising level of detail. According to the report, the bullet that killed Grace was fired from a gun she was holding in her right hand. The bullet pierced her left temple, deviated from the center line to the right, and lodged in the occipital lobe of her skull. The unusual trajectory of the bullet raised questions among experts about the official story. The Holland family stated that the detective spoke briefly with Robert at the crime scene. Robert reportedly told the police that Grace was struggling with depression following a recent miscarriage, their second. He claimed that he was in the living room when Grace emerged from the bedroom to hug him, but soon returned to the bedroom. He said he heard a shot and found Grace in the bedroom with a gun and blood under her head. The detective submitted a report to the medical examiner at 7:25 a.m. However, the Holland family disputed this, claiming that Robert visited the police station with his lawyer on the same day. Robert gave a written statement that contradicted the report. In his new version of events, Robert stated that he and Grace were in the bedroom together before she left for work. According to Robert, Grace returned to hug him, brought her face close to his, said goodbye, and then a shot occurred. A published press release on January 31, 2024, raised questions about a missing recording of an interview between Robert and a detective from the police department during the investigation. Jeffrey Hartman, the police chief, confirmed the existence of the video interview to a TV channel in 2021. Hartman reported that an error in the department's recording system led to the deletion of the record, leaving many questions unanswered. The police investigated Grace's death on August 4, 2020, and suggested she had been depressed, implying her death was expected. Analyzing Robert's phone data, detectives concluded it was a suicide based on forensic results. However, the Holland family doubted the police's findings and hired a private detective, believing Robert was responsible for her death. Laura, Grace's sister, shared her concerns about the investigation online, detailing the evidence and facts that suggested the police had gotten it wrong. The Holland family expressed their disappointment and frustration with the police, who had never considered Robert a suspect despite the numerous clues pointing to his involvement. The family also criticized the investigators for not conducting thorough tests, such as checking Robert's and Grace's hands for gunpowder residue and examining Robert's clothes for evidence. Furthermore, the police department had lost several crucial videos that could have shed light on Robert's role in the incident. The Holland family expressed concerns about potential police bias against Robert, citing his unusual behavior after Grace's death. Robert showed no concern for Grace's well-being. The family also pointed out that Robert knew some people involved in the investigation, which they believed may have influenced the case. The family claimed that obvious signs of domestic violence were ignored. After their requests for a more thorough investigation were met with no response, the Hollands took their case to court in 2023. They filed a lawsuit against Robert, accusing him of physical abuse and suggesting that he was either directly responsible for Grace's death. Robert's lawyer maintained his client's innocence, acknowledging some facts but denying any involvement in Grace's death. He suggested that the family's emotional distress may have led them to misinterpret events and wrongly accuse Robert. In December 2023, Hartman of the police department requested that the St. Louis County Police Department review the case of Grace. The county police department agreed to review the case and began examining the details in January 2024. During this time, police officers visited the home of Robert to provide medical assistance to his new girlfriend, Dr. Sarah Sweeney. The incident is being treated as a sudden death, but the exact cause is still under investigation. Detectives are waiting for the results of a toxicology report, which may take 4 to 6 weeks to complete. Dr. Sweeney had previously spoken about her struggles with serious illnesses, including bone disease and allergies, for which she was hospitalized in 2021. Her condition could have led to severe allergic reactions, including life-threatening anaphylactic shock, if left untreated. However, her family reported that she always carried an adrenaline shot to manage her allergies and kept her condition under control. They are choosing to wait for the official autopsy results before drawing any conclusions. Robert remains a suspect in the eyes of the law, despite not being charged in connection with the deaths of Holland and Sweeney. The outcome of the Sweeney autopsy may significantly impact the investigation into Grace Holland's death. Following a thorough re-examination, the St. Louis County Police have ruled out the possibility that Grace took her own life. The investigation's findings were submitted to the prosecutor's office in early December, and the case is currently being treated as a death by negligence. The case remains open, and the prosecutor's office may take further action once all the facts are known. Police Chief Jeffrey Hartman has reaffirmed the department's initial conclusion, despite growing doubts and public scrutiny. Meanwhile, the families of Holland and Sweeney continue to push for the release of autopsy and toxicology results, seeking clarity on whether Grace Holland's death was a tragic accident or if there are underlying circumstances that have yet to be uncovered. Today, we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Jenna Oakley. Jenna Oakley was born on March 2, 2001, in Indiana. She lived with her mother and 2-year-old brother in a troubled home. Due to her mother's neglect and inability to provide a stable life, Jenna often found herself left alone from a young age. The situation worsened over time, leading to intervention from Child Protective Services in April 2016. As a result, Jenna and her brother were removed from their mother's care and relocated to live with Philip Oakley, who their father, and his wife, Rhonda, who was 52 years old at the time. Rhonda welcomed the children into her home and accepted them as her own. Philip later revealed that Rhonda had been eager to be a good mother to her stepchildren from the start. She welcomed them into her home with open arms and worked to create a safe and comfortable environment for them. Jenna was a difficult child to manage. Despite her academic success, which earned her praise from her teachers, she struggled to follow the rules in her new home. Her behavior became an even greater concern when her parents discovered her relationship with a 20-year-old man named Kenneth, whom she had met at the age of 10 while living with her mother in Indiana. Kenneth was a mysterious figure who seemed to be both a supportive influence and a hindrance in Jenna's life. To better understand the events that unfolded, it's essential to delve into Rhonda's story and explore the complexities of her personality, as well as the significant impact she had on Jenna's life. Rhonda Oakley was born on March 5, 1964, in Cassy County, Kentucky, to parents Howard Lee Raines and Mabel Walls Raines. She graduated from Cassy County High School in 1982 and went on to work for 30 years in a prominent company that specialized in marketing, packaging, and printing services. Rhonda was a kind, loving, and cheerful person who was highly respected by her friends, who admired her warmth and kindness towards others. Rhonda met Philip Oakley on a golf course, and they fell deeply in love. They decided to get married and start a new life together. However, their relationship was not without its challenges. At the time, Rhonda was divorced and had 4 children from her previous marriage. Philip and Rhonda's family were initially against their relationship due to their significant age difference. They asked Philip to end the relationship, which led to frequent arguments within the family. For that reason, Philip believed the relationship of Kenneth and Jenna was unacceptable because Kenneth was 5 years older than his daughter, Jenna. Philip even threatened to involve the police if Kenneth continued to date Jenna. To maintain control of the situation, Philip and Rhonda took measures such as confiscating Jenna's phone and computer and enforcing strict rules. The situation at home became so unbearable for she that she finally confided in her father and stepmother, promising to end her relationship with Kenneth. However, she failed to keep this promise and continued to secretly meet with him. As a result, her relationship with her parents deteriorated, and she began to harbor a deep-seated hatred towards her parents. On September 1, 2016, at around 4 p.m., David, her younger brother, returned home from school and entered the house. As he walked into the kitchen, he was startled by the sound of 3 of their dogs barking frantically in the basement. Curious, David rushed downstairs to investigate and found his mother, Rhonda, lying motionless on the floor. Panicked, David immediately ran outside to seek help and eventually went to a neighbor's house to call the police. When the emergency services arrived, they were unable to revive Rhonda, and she was pronounced dead at the scene. The police found deep cuts on her neck, indicating a brutal attack. Initially, the police suspected a robbery, but upon further investigation, they discovered that nothing in the house had been stolen or disturbed. The investigation into Rhonda's death began, and her family and friends were left wondering who could have committed such a heinous crime. As the investigation progressed, several key pieces of evidence came to light. Rhonda's car was discovered to be missing, and a trash can in the kitchen was found to contain vomit. Furthermore, one of the large meat cleavers from the kitchen was found to be missing, leading investigators to suspect that it may have been the weapon used to attack Rhonda. When Philip returned home, he was questioned by detectives and informed them that his daughter, Jenna, had not attended school that day. In fact, Jenna had been unreachable since the incident, and her teachers had called Philip early in the morning to report her absence. This led the police to believe that Jenna may have been kidnapped by the same individuals who killed Rhonda, and that she may be in danger. During the questioning, detectives asked Philip if he knew of anyone who might have wanted to harm Rhonda or the family. Philip revealed that his daughter's boyfriend, Kenneth, had a troubled relationship with Jenna, and that it had deteriorated significantly. Philip admitted that he had threatened to contact the police if Kenneth did not stop seeing Jenna. Philip suspected that his daughter had been dishonest with him and that she and Kenneth had never intended to break up or follow the rules. It was possible that Kenneth had planned to get rid of the source of his problems and take Jenna with him. After learning this, the police focused their efforts on finding Kenneth. They discovered that on August 31st, the day before the incident, Kenneth had flown from Indiana to Lexington, Kentucky, at 3 a.m. From there, he took a taxi to Oakley's house. Another crucial piece of evidence came from a store manager in Denver, who claimed to have seen Jenna with a young man on September 1st. The manager handed over surveillance footage to the police, which showed Jenna and Kenneth entering the store and then leaving together to get into a car that looked like Rhonda's stolen vehicle. Notably, Jenna appeared calm and normal in the footage, not showing any signs of distress or being coerced. Her behavior led investigators to dismiss the possibility that she was being held against her will and raised suspicions that she might be involved in a crime against her stepmother. A search of Jenna's room later revealed a diary that confirmed these suspicions. The diary exposed a deep-seated hatred that her family seemed to be unaware of. Jenna wrote about her ongoing feelings for Kenneth, with whom she had maintained contact despite promising to stay away. Interspersed with these entries were expressions of resentment towards her family members, which grew increasingly disturbing over time. Jenna wrote in her diary that she intended to kill her father, stepmother, and brother to prevent them from ever separating her from Kenneth again, allowing her to be with him without interference. She outlined a specific plan and timeline to carry out these actions. When her father, Philip, read her words, he was overcome with shock and fainted. He struggled to comprehend that his daughter would not only conceive of such a heinous act, but also possess the determination to make it a reality. Jenna had a plan to kill her family members. First, she intended to kill her father between 4 o'clock and 5 a.m. by luring him to the basement and stabbing him in the neck. Her next target was Rhonda, whom she planned to kill in her bedroom between 6 o'clock and 8 a.m. using the same knife. After that, she planned to kill her brother David in his room. The police discovered Jenna's diary at the start of their investigation, which became the primary evidence against her. Meanwhile, Philip gave the police Kenneth's phone number, allowing them to track and apprehend Kenneth and his girlfriend. On September 4th, 3 days after the crime, investigators located the fugitives in Tucumcari, New Mexico. The police informed local authorities about the case, who quickly located Rhonda's stolen car near a hotel where Kenneth and Jenna were staying. They were arrested and transported separately to a New Mexico detention center, awaiting extradition. However, a search of the car did not yield the weapon used in the attack on Rhonda. Kenneth chose not to face trial. He attempted to take his own life in his cell by hanging himself and wrote a letter. Officers found him and rushed him to the hospital, where he was in critical condition. In his letter, Kenneth claimed responsibility for the crime and stated that he and Jenna acted according to his plan, attempting to take the blame to absolve her. The authorities kept Kenneth's attempt on his own life and his confession from Jenna for a time, deciding it was best she didn't know while being transported to Kentucky. They wanted her to give her own testimony without being influenced by Kenneth's actions. Upon arriving in Kentucky, Jenna also confessed to the crime, providing the police with a detailed account of her actions. According to Jenna, on the day before the crime, Kenneth visited her at her house. They met early in the morning, which is why Jenna didn't attend school that day. They spent the entire day together. Rhonda arrived home around 3 p.m. and encountered Kenneth in the basement. This encounter sparked an argument between Rhonda and Jenna, which eventually turned violent. The violence escalated to the point where Jenna attempted to strangle Rhonda by grabbing her neck. Kenneth then intervened, taking over from Jenna. He grasped Rhonda's throat with such force that she soon lost consciousness and fell to the floor. Once Rhonda was unconscious, Jenna took a kitchen knife and inflicted fatal wounds on her neck, leading to her death. Witnessing the scene caused Kenneth to become ill, and he vomited into a trash can. When questioned by the police about the knife used in the crime, Jenna stated that she and Kenneth had disposed of it during their escape. They had wrapped the knife in a bag and thrown it away at a fast food restaurant. Jenna provided this testimony while Kenneth was still in serious condition at the hospital. He was charged with first-degree murder but was unable to stand trial due to his self-inflicted injuries. After 6 weeks on life support, he passed away. In October 2019, Jenna was formally charged with her stepmother's death. The charges alleged she either caused the death or collaborated with someone else. She also faced a theft charge. Jenna was held without bail at a juvenile detention center. Her father, Philip, stated he didn't care that she was his daughter and felt she didn't deserve his protection after the incident. He hoped Jenna would receive the punishment she deserved. Jenna wasn't informed of Kenneth's death until a court hearing, where she fainted upon learning the news. After regaining consciousness, she screamed, cried, and struggled to calm down. In January 2019, Jenna pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter and expressed regret for her actions in court the following month. She expressed remorse for the pain, anger, and disappointment she caused. Upon learning of the plea deal, Philip expressed disappointment, stating that the system failed to prevent the crime against his wife. He claimed there were warning signs that Jenna was in trouble, but no one took action. Philip added that people often advise going to the police immediately, which he and his wife did, yet they still found themselves in a terrible situation. At the sentencing hearing in March, Susan Hooper, a mitigation specialist for the defense, explained that the defendant suffered from abuse, violence, neglect, and lack of basic human rights throughout her life. The lawyer questioned what could have driven a 15-year-old with no history of violence to commit such a crime. The lawyer noted that Jenna had no prior record, was respected by teachers and peers, and it was unclear what led her to take such a desperate step. It was also noted that none of Jenna's family attended the hearing. Philip declined to participate, and Jenna's mother never appeared in court to learn her daughter's fate. This was unusual, as parents typically show interest in the case's progress, even in difficult cases where the accused has committed serious crimes. The lawyer, Susan, gathered extensive evidence and records showing that Jenna was abandoned by her mother, Christ, who neglected her well-being. Susan conducted an in-depth examination of Jenna's early life by reviewing child care and medical records in Indiana and Kent. She also interviewed various individuals who knew Jenna, including neighbors, family friends, caregivers, teachers, school counselors, and her older half-sister. The sister's testimony was particularly relevant, as she had lived with Jenna for several years. According to the sister, they never had a stable or safe home environment. After Christ's divorce from Philip, she started working at a local Indiana prison, where she became romantically involved with an inmate. She eventually posted bail for him, and he moved into their home. This marked the beginning of a nightmare for Jenna, who was only 3 years old at the time. The man consistently robbed them and brought other women into the house, all while Jenna and her brother were present. A neighbor contacted Child Services after discovering that Jenna's family home was infested with rats and that the young children were being left alone all day. When a social worker visited the home, she encountered a hostile mother who refused to let her inside. Upon eventually gaining entry, the social worker was met with a horrific scene. The house was filled with rotting food, piles of trash, rat droppings, and human waste. The kitchen was overrun with unwashed dishes, covered in mold and infested with rodents and insects, including a large number of cockroaches and fleas. The children were living in deplorable conditions, with no regard for their safety. They had unrestricted access to medications and other hazardous substances, further endangering their well-being. Despite efforts to improve their situation, relocating Jenna and her younger brother to live with their father in Kentucky did not alleviate their problems. Susan stated that Philip and Rhonda neglected them, forcing Jenna to sleep in an unclean basement. However, the lawyer countered that Jenna had simply moved from one unstable home to another. Prosecutor Richie Borms presented evidence during the hearing, demonstrating that Philip made every effort to provide for the children's needs and create a good home. Despite the defense attorney's claims, Borms argued that if abuse or neglect had occurred, child care services would have been notified by Jenna's neighbors, friends, or teachers. Furthermore, the prosecutor inquired if the defense attorney was aware of Jenna's relationship with Kenneth and the fact that her parents disapproved of they. The defense attorney stated that Kenneth was the only person who genuinely cared for the accused, Jenna. According to the defense, Jenna's past experiences had left her with unmet emotional needs. She was searching for someone to provide her with the love and care she had always lacked, and having lost that person, she was now devastated. Defense attorney Anthony Lee Taylor presented scientific documents to justify Jenna's behavior. The articles explained how the child abuse Jenna suffered at a young age had negatively impacted her psychological development. Anthony told the court that his conversations with Jenna led him to believe that she lacked parental love and that her strained relationship with her mother contributed to her inappropriate relationship with Kenneth. Jenna supported this statement by reading a letter in which she expressed her deep regret and apologized to her family for her actions. She acknowledged the pain she had caused Rhonda's family and friends and claimed that she had since become a completely different person, distinct from the Jenna who committed the crime. When Philip stepped up to the podium, the atmosphere in the hall became tense. He and his daughter were visibly anxious about the impending conversation. Philip approached Jenna, looked her straight in the eye, and asked what had driven her to commit such a serious offense. He reminded her that as her father, he had always treated her with respect, and that Rhonda had never spoken ill of her or caused her harm. Philip explained that when they took Jenna in, it was to give her a better life, and that Rhonda had cared for her like her own daughter. However, Philip acknowledged that Jenna had been a challenging teenager, and that he and Rhonda had discussed sending her to a specialized institution to help her get back on track. Philip also shared his concerns about Jenna's relationship with Kenneth, describing him as a predator who had taken advantage of his underage daughter. Philip revealed that when he discovered Jenna and Kenneth were still in contact despite being forbidden from doing so, he reported Kenneth to the police and warned him to stay away from Jenna, threatening legal action if necessary. Philip turned to his daughter, visibly shaken. He condemned her crime as unforgivable, citing Rhonda's exceptional character as a wonderful woman and mother, unmatched by anyone. He emphasized how Jenna's actions had devastated not only Rhonda but also others. Philip then questioned why Jenna planned to harm him and her brother, arguing that she was not a victim, but rather someone influenced by circumstance. Despite this, he concluded by reaffirming his love for her, saying that regardless of her actions, she would always be his daughter. Jenna, overwhelmed, burst into tears, shouting at her father that she never felt part of the family and had never experienced his love. Following this outburst, the judge called for a recess to deliberate the verdict. On March 27, 2019, the verdict was announced. Jenna Oakley was sentenced to 15 years in prison, with 10 years for first-degree murder and 5 years for car theft. She would be eligible for parole in 2034. This case served as a reminder that justice, though sometimes delayed, ultimately prevails, and those who commit heinous crimes will. We're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Milleke van Doorn. Milleke grew up in a typical family with her parents and 2 sisters in Zaanstad, a city in North Holland, Netherlands. Milleke was a well-behaved child who stayed out of trouble and was friendly to everyone. Having just graduated from high school with a good reputation, she was looking forward to a bright future. However, her life took a dramatic turn one summer evening. That summer night changed everything for Milleke, and her story became a national sensation. On the evening of Sunday, June 7, 1992, Milleke attended a birthday party for a friend, which was held in an apartment in a local building. The building looked almost the same back then as it does today, except for the taller trees that surround it. Milleke left her birthday celebration early to catch the last bus home, but when she arrived at the bus stop, she realized she had missed it by 30 minutes. Unbeknownst to her, the bus schedule had been adjusted due to the Pentecost holiday. She had another option to get home than taking the train from the station located half a mile away on the same street. However, she never come home. The next morning, the pastor of St. Joseph's Church, which is near the train station, made a disturbing discovery while on his morning walk. He found a body floating in the pond adjacent to the church and immediately called the police at 8:54 a.m. Within minutes, detectives arrived at the scene, and the tragic news was soon delivered to the Van Doorn family, leaving them in a state of shock and grief. Milleke's body was pulled from the water, bearing signs of a violent crime. Injuries on her neck, face, and body, including multiple stab wounds, were evident. She was also found partially undressed. In an attempt to conceal the crime, the perpetrator had covered the body with reeds, but this effort failed, leading to its discovery. The news of Milleke's tragic death was devastating for her family, who had envisioned a bright future for her. The autopsy provided some information about the crime. The presence of semen and pubic hair in Milleke's body suggested a sexual assault. The fact that there was no water in Milleke's lungs indicated that she did not drown in the pond. Instead, she had likely been killed elsewhere, and her body was later hidden in the water in an attempt to disguise the crime. The exact time of Milleke's death remained unclear, with possibilities ranging from immediately after she left a party to several hours later. Milleke's body was found in the water, which made it impossible to determine the time of death by body temperature alone. The pond was where her body was dumped, but it was not the location where she was actually killed. The police were searching for the original crime scene, where they expected to find evidence due to the severity of Milika's injuries. A key piece of evidence was that one of her shoes was missing, which could potentially lead investigators to both the crime scene and the perpetrator. The police distributed flyers with information about the case, including the fact that one of Milika's shoes was missing. They asked the public to report if the shoe was found, and eventually, the second shoe was discovered. At the time of the investigation in 1992, DNA research was not advanced, and DNA samples taken from Milika's body did not provide any useful leads for the detectives. The investigation began with interviews with Milika's family to determine if she had any conflicts or enemies. However, the family reported that Milika had no conflicts with anyone and was doing well personally. She had a boyfriend around her age, and they rarely fought. After learning that Milika attended a birthday party on the night she died, investigators spoke to all the guests, including her boyfriend. However, numerous interviews did not produce any leads, and everyone reported the same story that Milika had left the party just before midnight and planned to take a bus to her neighborhood. Unfortunately, none of Milika's friends were aware that the last bus had already departed by the time she reached the bus stop. In 1992, mobile phones were not widespread, making it difficult for investigators to determine if Milika had boarded the bus or reached her destination safely. After ruling out her friends as suspects, the police began searching for witnesses who may have seen or heard something on the night of the crime. They conducted door-to-door interviews with residents in the area where Milika's body was found, gathering a significant amount of information, but few specific details. Several witnesses reported hearing a woman scream briefly at night, but it was not alarming enough to prompt them to take action. Others claimed to have seen a man of Turkish appearance riding a bicycle towards the location where Milika's body was discovered. As a result, investigators shifted their focus to the Turkish community living in the Kogerveld neighborhood. Some young men from the Turkish community had previous run-ins with the law, drawing the attention of investigators. However, despite months of inquiry, the police were unable to identify a suspect. The men they questioned denied being near the pond on the night of the crime, leading to a stalemate in the investigation. 6 months after Milika van Doorn's murder, a significant discovery was made when a roofer working on the roof of St. Joseph's Church found one of Milika's shoes. This shoe had been on the roof the entire time, but it was unclear how it got there since the only way to access the roof was by ladder. The conclusion was that the perpetrator must have deliberately thrown the shoe onto the roof while at the pond, but the reasoning behind this action remains a mystery. Unfortunately, any potential evidence that may have been left on the roof was erased by harsh weather conditions over time. Years went by, and Milika's case remained unsolved, causing immense pain for her parents. Despite the passing of time, the police revisited Milika's case, conducting multiple interviews with local residents in an attempt to uncover new information. Additionally, the case was featured on several television programs, which led to an influx of calls from the public with potential leads. However, none of these efforts resulted in a breakthrough, and the identity of the suspect remains unknown. The authorities had the perpetrator's DNA samples on file, waiting for a breakthrough in testing technology. By analyzing these samples, forensic experts inferred that the perpetrator was likely a male of Turkish origin, residing in the Kogerveld area in 1992, and aged between 16 and 30 years at the time of the crime. To narrow down the search, nearly 200 men from the area voluntarily provided cheek swabs for DNA testing, but unfortunately, this effort did not yield a match. Almost 20 years after Milika's murder, a significant breakthrough occurred in April 2012. The Netherlands amended a law, making it possible to conduct DNA kinship testing. By analyzing the autopsy results, evidence, and the perpetrator's behavior, investigators created a psychological profile of the suspect. The profile suggested that the perpetrator was a resentful and frustrated individual, angry at women in general. Milica was likely an accidental victim who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The perpetrator may have had a brief conversation with Milica before attacking her violently and threatening her. After satisfying his urges, he killed her to prevent her from identifying him. For several weeks after the crime, he kept a low profile, possibly pretending to be ill to avoid social interactions and conceal the scratches he sustained during the struggle with Milica. The police profiler described the suspect as a hot-tempered, selfish, and critical individual with few friends, poor relationships with girlfriends, and an inability to handle criticism. Based on this profile, investigators estimated that the perpetrator was between 18 and 25 years old in 1992. In April 2016, investigators reopened the case of Milica Van Doorn, which had gone cold for over 20 years. A new lead emerged in June 2016, when a report was filed mentioning the names of two Turkish men who had lived in Zandvoort in 1992, around the time of Milica's death. Notably, both men had left the area shortly after the incident. The police aimed to determine if these two individuals were connected to the crime. Tracking them down proved challenging, and it took over a year to locate them in Turkey and obtain the necessary DNA samples. Finally, the DNA analysis did not yield a match with the DNA evidence found on Milica's body. In 2017, authorities used DNA typing technology to re-examine the Milica case. As a result, the police contacted 133 men of Turkish origin who lived in the area where the body was found in 1992, asking for voluntary DNA samples to compare to the crime scene DNA. The goal was to analyze the Y chromosome pattern, which is passed from father to son, to identify potential relatives of the perpetrator. The authorities assured the men that their DNA would only be used for this case and would be destroyed afterward. Most of the 133 men agreed to provide a DNA sample, only a few refused. A total of 126 men participated in the study. The police appreciated their cooperation, saying it was a testament to the community's desire for justice. After a month of analysis, the results showed that the DNA of the original perpetrator was not among the samples. However, the DNA of a man who was unknowingly related to the perpetrator was found. On Monday, December 10, 2017, the police arrested the suspect who had evaded capture for 25 years. The man, 47-year-old Hussein, had refused to submit his DNA for verification, but a clever investigation led to his downfall. Since local laws prohibit sharing suspects' personal information, his full identity and photo were not made public. A breakthrough in the case came when investigators cross-checked DNA profiles of relatives, focusing on those who, like Hussein, had refused to provide a sample. Coincidentally, Hussein's brother had willingly provided his DNA to the authorities, unaware of its potential impact on his sibling. This helped the investigators build a list of people connected to Hussein through family ties, ultimately revealing his identity as the suspect who had managed to stay hidden for nearly 2.5 decades. The police obtained a warrant to take a DNA sample from Hussein without his permission. A comparison with the DNA samples from Milica's body showed a perfect match, providing strong evidence against him. As a result, Hussein was formally charged with the crime. During his 2018 trial, Hussein claimed he was not guilty. Initially, he said he was possessed by an evil spirit and couldn't remember the attack. Later, he changed his story, saying he had a secret relationship with Milica, which is why his DNA was found on her body. He claimed he had to keep the relationship a secret because he had recently gotten married. However, the judge didn't believe Hussein's new claim for two reasons. Firstly, he only made this statement a year after his arrest, and secondly, no one could confirm that Milica and Hussein even knew each other, let alone had an intimate relationship. Milika's family testified during the trial. Milika's sister spoke directly to the suspect, saying that he had kept silent for years, hadn't cooperated with the police when they asked for a DNA test, and had continued living freely in the neighborhood. She accused him of going on to start a family and have had 4 daughters, and called him a monster who had ruined Milica's life. She expressed her disgust that there were men like him who used and exploited women, treated them like trash, and then simply moved on with their lives. The other sister expressed her disappointment and frustration that Hussein had not taken responsibility for his actions or shown remorse. Instead, he had made a surprising claim of a secret relationship with the victim and complained about his own family struggles. She pointed out that Hussein's family could visit him in prison if they wished, but she could only visit her sister's grave. She hoped for justice, believing that her sister deserved it after meeting a terrible end. It was a deeply emotional day for Milika Van Doorn's family. When her father was given the opportunity to speak, he was filled with anger and said that Hussein's silence for 25 years was cowardly. He found Hussein's treatment of Milika to be extremely disturbing and was shocked by the news of her death. On December 11, 2018, Hussein was found guilty of Milika's murder based on DNA evidence. The court determined that the murder was committed to cover up another crime, a sex crime. Hussein was sentenced to 20 years in prison and ordered to pay €10,000 in compensation to Milika's family. Notably, Hussein refused to be present in the courtroom during the sentencing and instead remained in a cell outside. In February 2019, Hussein appealed his 20-year prison sentence and it was reduced to 19 years and 7 months. But finally, he did not get to serve the full reduced term. Hussein was found dead on June 13, 2022. According to his lawyer, he died shortly after exercising despite receiving emergency medical treatment. The attempts to revive him were Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Hannah Clark. Hannah Clark was born on September 8, 1988. By 2020, she was a devoted mother of 3 young children, 2 sweet girls, Aaliyah and Liana, and a rambunctious boy named Trey. Hannah's loved ones remember her as a kind and gentle soul with a bright smile that could light up anyone's heart. She was a selfless and caring mother who gave her all to her children. Hannah's family life was marked by her relationship with her ex-husband, Rowan Baxter, a rugby player for the New Zealand Warriors team. Despite their significant age difference, they formed a strong bond, which deepened over time. Sue Clark, Hannah's mother, struggled to accept Rowan, but Hannah refused to listen to her concerns. People close to Rowan shared negative opinions about him. Sue, Hannah's mother, had a nagging feeling that something was off about Rowan. She perceived him as arrogant and self-centered, which made her uneasy. She was also concerned about the significant age gap between Rowan and Hannah. When they first met, Hannah was a recent graduate, while Rowan was 31 years old. Additionally, Rowan's past relationships were a worry for Sue, particularly since he was still in the process of divorcing his previous wife and was living with her at the time. When Hannah introduced Rowan to her parents, they questioned him about his ex-wife. Rowan explained that he was staying with her due to their son. Eventually, Rowan finalized his divorce and continued his relationship with Hannah. In 2011, he proposed to her, and she accepted. They got married in Kingsley, New South Wales, Australia. The following year, they had 3 children together. Hannah and her family, including her father Rowan, were passionate about sports. However, Rowan's muscular physique, developed during his professional athlete days, was partly due to steroid use, which led to mental health issues. As a personal trainer, Hannah's approach differed from her father's. She was loved by her clients for her kindness, empathy, and dedication, earning her a loyal following. Rowan's approach to training was unique, but his behavior was marred by aggression and inappropriateness, likely caused by steroid use. This made him a poor trainer, as clients don't need someone who makes them feel uncomfortable. Rowan struggled to communicate effectively with people, which negatively impacted his career and finances. As a result, his wife Hannah had to become the primary breadwinner, which further irritated Rowan. He felt emasculated by her success, as she was doing a better job than he was. Despite their financial struggles, they decided to open their own fitness club. However, this decision was largely driven by Rowan's desire to control Hannah's every move and monitor her whereabouts. Rowan's behavior in the store mirrored his past actions at the gyms where he worked. He often felt the need to assert superiority over women. During a private training session with Sue's mother, he showed his cruel side, acting inappropriately instead of showing respect. He dropped Sue, causing her to hit her head and bleed, and laughed at her clumsiness, showing no sympathy. Despite this alarming behavior, Hannah's parents tried to accept him for their daughter's sake. Rowan's control over Hannah was all-encompassing, and he isolated her from her family and friends. He dictated who she could see and when, and even forbade the children from visiting their grandmother and Hannah from communicating with her brother, whom he disliked. As a result, Hannah felt trapped and enslaved, confined to the walls of her own home. Rowan's behavior towards Hannah was also emotionally and physically abusive. He would demand intimacy from her, and if she refused, he would become enraged, taking out his anger on her and the children. After forcing himself on her, he would then apologize insincerely, attributing his behavior to a burst of passion. Hannah's life was slowly under the constant control and cruelty of her husband, Rowan. Their marriage, once filled with love and passion, had degenerated into a nightmare of fear and submission. Rowan's tyrannical behavior had created a toxic environment, where Hannah lived in constant terror of his wrath. Rowan's cruelty was not limited to Hannah, he also targeted their children. While some playful exchanges between parents and children are normal, Rowan frequently crossed the line, intentionally hurting and belittling them. When the children cried, he would mock them, showing no empathy or respect for their feelings. For example, a conflict between Rowan and his daughter Aaliyah turned disastrous when Rowan used excessive force, causing Aaliyah to hit her head. The injury was severe enough to require hospitalization and stitches. Instead of taking responsibility and apologizing, Rowan blamed Aaliyah for the incident. This was not an isolated incident, as Rowan had a history of tormenting his children. As an athlete, he would take ice baths after training, but he would also force his children, including his young son Trey, to sit in icy water, disregarding their tears and pleas for mercy. In the same year, Hannah's life took a drastic turn for the worse. Rowan, who had recently become interested in jiu-jitsu, returned home from a training session one day, still pumped up with adrenaline. Without warning, he physically attacked Hannah, grabbing her throat with a tight grip and uttering terrifying words. Consumed by fear, Hannah didn't immediately recognize that she was experiencing domestic violence. However, this incident was far more frightening than anything she had previously endured. As a result, Hannah made up her mind to leave Rowan at the earliest chance. After reaching out to the police, she provided a detailed account of the horrific experience to the officer. The police officer informed Hannah that forcing an intimate relationship without consent is a form of domestic violence. This conversation was a turning point for Hannah, helping her understand the situation and prompting her to take immediate action. She quickly gathered her children and left for her parents' house, trying to escape the abusive situation. Although their divorce was not yet finalized in November 2019, Hannah made the decision to allow Rowan to spend time with their children. However, she was aware that she had no legal authority to control this arrangement without a court's intervention. Even so, Hannah was still uneasy about leaving the children in Rowan's care. To fix his problem, Rowan was struggling to cope with his emotions and sought help from his church's pastor, Christopher. Christopher was a kind and supportive person who was always willing to listen. However, as Rowan began to open up to him, Christopher noticed some disturbing traits. Rowan had a desire for dominance and control, which he occasionally revealed when his confidence faltered. During one of these moments, Rowan confessed to Christopher that he was aware his actions were wrong and wanted to change, but didn't know how. Rowan's admission was a crucial step towards reform, and Christopher's guidance could have been instrumental in helping him. However, before progress could be made, a shocking event occurred. Hannah and her children were walking down the street when Rowan suddenly appeared out of nowhere, grabbed their daughter Lion, and disappeared. Hannah's life was turned upside down by unbearable anxiety and fear for her daughter Lion's safety. For 2 agonizing days, she had no idea where Lion was, and her distress grew by the minute. Hannah turned to the police, who launched a search and eventually found Lion safe and sound with her father. Although Lion was unharmed, the traumatic experience left a lasting impact on Hannah. The police, recognizing the danger that Hannah and her children faced, urged her to file a police report against her ex and obtain a protection order. However, despite the problems her ex, Rowan, had caused, he still had joint custody of the children, which he used to continue manipulating and abusing Hannah. After a meeting with Rowan, the children were returned to Hannah's parents. However, before leaving, Rowan attempted to humiliate Hannah by displaying pictures of her in her underwear on his car, in plain sight of their children. Hannah, enraged, tried to remove the photos, but Rowan responded violently. He grabbed her shoulder, twisted her arm, and punched her in the face, splitting her lip. The attack was only stopped when Hannah's mother, Sue, intervened. As Rowan drove away, he yelled insults. Hannah, traumatized, immediately reported the incident to the police, as it was a clear violation of the protection order. Unfortunately, the authorities were unable to respond in time, which ultimately led to a tragic outcome. It was a typical morning on February 19, 2020. Hannah grabbed her car keys and left her parents' house to drop off her 3 kids at kindergarten. Hannah and her children got into the car, but before they could leave, Rowan jumped in, causing Hannah to become frightened for their safety. She tried to calm Rowan down, but he was furious and began yelling threats and ordering Hannah to start the car and drive away. Hannah carefully drove off, trying not to escalate the situation. As she turned onto Raven Street, the car stopped. In a desperate and vengeful act, Rowan grabbed a canister of gasoline from under the car seat and drenched Hannah and her children with it. Michael ZCK, who happened to be nearby, witnessed the horrific scene. He said that earlier that morning, he had heard a car pull up outside his house. Hannah, frantic and pleading for help, screamed that Rowan was trying to kill her and pouring gasoline all over them. As Hannah begged for mercy, Rowan refused to let her go, his face twisted in a rage. Michael rushed to the car and was met with Rowan's emotionless face, holding a lighter in his hand. In the next moment, the car erupted in flames. The explosion was followed by blood-curdling screams, a deafening ringing, and then an eerie silence. Luckily, Hannah had narrowly escaped the inferno, but was left with severe burns and bleeding. Frantically, she pleaded for assistance, not for her own suffering, but for her children who remained trapped in the blazing car. A car happened to drive by, and a doctor who was not on duty stopped to offer assistance. Seeing Hannah's distress, the doctor rushed to her side. Meanwhile, Michael intervened quickly, grabbing a hose from his house to try and extinguish the flames. However, the fire was too intense, and it engulfed the entire car, leaving no hope of rescuing the children. The doctor and Michael yelled at Hannah to take cover and get away from the fire, but she was too consumed by grief to hear them. With growing desperation, Michael rushed to the car to rescue the children, but the intense flames and scorching heat thwarted his efforts. Hannah lay on the road, her body badly burned, repeatedly begging for someone to save her children. At that moment, no one grasped the full extent of the tragedy. Hannah's body was severely burned, with over 97% of her skin damaged, except for her feet. Despite her excruciating pain, Hannah's thoughts were consumed by her children, who were now left vulnerable and unprotected. Hannah's badly burned body left police doubting her survival chances. Yet, she refused to give up. With fierce determination, she provided a crucial testimony. Police officer Angus Cook carefully recorded every word Hannah spoke as she struggled to recount the events leading up to her tragic situation. With great difficulty, Hannah managed to name her ex-husband, Rowan Baxter, as the person responsible for her ordeal, and provided a detailed account of what had happened. As Hannah's voice grew weaker and her body frail, Officer Angus remained by her side, offering words of encouragement and praise for her bravery. He reassured her that she had already done enough and that everything would be okay. Hannah was on the brink of death, yet she didn't fully grasp the horror unfolding around her. When questioned about whether Rowan had threatened her earlier, she replied that he hadn't. As doctors approached to alleviate her suffering, she lost the ability to speak. Meanwhile, Rowan Baxter's behavior was erratic. Despite suffering severe burns covering 80% of his body, he managed to exit the car unassisted. Rowan sat on the road, staring at the burning vehicle. After a brief moment, he inexplicably climbed back into the car, which was engulfed in flames. A witness, putting their own life at risk, attempted to extinguish the fire at the back of the car. It was then that Rowan retrieved a knife from the vehicle and began to chase people away, preventing them from putting out the flames. The children, trapped in the burning car, had little chance of survival. Nevertheless, bystanders refused to give up their efforts to save them. Rowan refused to let anyone approach the car, claimed them to a horrific death. In a final, selfish act, he stabbed himself with the knife. Despite her own life-threatening injuries, her primary concern was for the health of her children and her desire to reveal the truth. Tragically, Hannah passed away in the hospital on the same day, at the young age of 31. Hannah was a victim of severe domestic violence, which also affected her children. She fought tirelessly to protect her family from their abuser, but sadly, her efforts were ultimately unsuccessful. Throughout her daily struggles, Hannah showed immense courage, standing up for her loved ones despite the numerous challenges she faced. For days later, a massive gathering took place to pay tribute to Hannah and her children. A lasting memorial, Hannah's House, was also created in Camp Hill, where a tree planting ceremony was held in her honor, accompanied by a plaque that tells the story of her life. Today, we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Antonia Barra. Antonia Barra was born on December 3, 1999, in Temuco, Chile, to a wealthy family. She was the youngest of 5 children, with 2 older brothers, Sebastian and Ignacio, and 2 sisters, Catalina and Carla. Antonia was particularly close to Catalina, whom she considered her best friend and confidant. Her parents valued education and encouraged their children to pursue their interests, including sports and music. As the youngest child, Antonia was especially loved and spoiled by her parents. Despite this, she was a diligent student and dreamed of studying tourism and traveling the world. At the age of 15, Antonia met Martín Pradenas on social media in 2015. Martín was 8 years older than Antonia and lived in the same city. He was divorced and had a child from a previous marriage. Little is known about Martín's early life, except that he was born in February 1992 in Temuco to Ivan Pronas and Paula Dare. When Martín was 20, he got a girl from his school pregnant, and to avoid scandal and punishment, he married her. However, the marriage ended shortly after the birth of their child. Martín and Antonia were acquaintances who knew each other from socializing with young people on social networks between 2015 and 2017. However, their relationship remained purely platonic. After Antonia graduated from high school and enrolled in university, she relocated to a different city, and they lost touch. At university, Antonia focused on her studies in the travel industry, formed new friendships, and explored new hobbies. Martine was no longer on her mind. During her breaks from university, Antonia would return to her hometown but primarily stayed in touch with her family, including her parents and siblings. During her time at university, Antonia developed a close bond with a fellow student named Consuela Herb, and they became nearly inseparable. She also started a romantic relationship with a student named Rodrigo Aguad, which lasted for approximately a year. However, they got into a dispute at the beginning of the new semester in September 2019 and decided to take a break from each other. Antonio had recently gone through a breakup and was feeling down. Luckily, the Chilean national holiday was just around the corner, offering a long weekend and a chance to take her mind off things. She and her best friend decided to attend an electronic music festival in the charming town of Pucón. They carpooled with 3 classmates, using Consuela's car. As it happened, close friends of Antonio's family owned a summer house in Pucón, and since the owners were out of town, they kindly offered Antonio and her friend the use of their house, even providing them with the spare key. Upon arrival, the group split up, and they friends settled into the spacious and cozy house, looking forward to a relaxing weekend getaway. On the evening of September 18th, Antonia ran into Martine while walking around the city, and they struck up a conversation. As it turned out, Martine was also in town for the festival with his friends and was staying in a large rented house just outside the city center. They hit it off and made plans to meet up the next day at a party at a popular nightclub. Antonia called her parents to fill them in on her plans, and her father warned her to be careful and not to drink too much. Antonia laughed it off and promised to be responsible. The next day, Antonia and her friends spent hours getting ready for the party, choosing outfits and doing their makeup. Before heading out, they shared a bottle of wine and then took a taxi to the club. When they arrived, they ordered a bottle of champagne at the bar and drank it together before hitting the dance floor. It was after midnight when Martine and his friends arrived at the club. Antonia was already quite drunk by then, but she continued to drink and dance with Martine. According to her friend, Consuela, Antonia was advised to slow down, but she didn't listen. At one point, Consuela lost track of Antonia and spent half an hour searching for her. When she finally found her, Antonia was in another room with Martine, barely able to stand due to her intoxication. Consuela saw her classmate Benjamin Morales at the club and asked for his help in getting her friend Antonia home. However, Antonia refused to leave, saying the night was still young. A short while later, she started to feel unwell, and her friends took her outside for some fresh air. After she felt a bit better, she returned to the club. Consuela went to Antonia later that night and told her that she was exhausted and ready to head home. However, Antonia declined, wanting to stay and continue having fun. Consuela then left the club, giving up on convincing Antonia to leave with her. She took a taxi home and went straight to bed. Benjamin saw Martine escorting Antonia out of the club, holding her because she was swaying from side to side. According to Benjamin, Antonia was too drunk to fight back, and Martine took advantage of her state. They waited near the entrance for a while, allowing Antonia to recover a bit. Soon, Martine's friends arrived and suggested they continue partying at their rented house. The company ordered a taxi, but Martine and Antonia decided to walk, as she was unwell and disoriented. Surveillance cameras captured their walk, showing the man supporting a drunk student who was trying to break free from his grasp. Along the way, they stopped at a 24-hour supermarket, where Martine purchased beer. Inside the empty store, Martine attempted to kiss she, but she pushed him away and turned her back on him. It was clear she was uncomfortable, but her intoxication left her unable to resist or escape. Martine, being stronger, continued to lead Antonia, and they eventually arrived at the rented house around 8 a.m. The people in the living room saw that she was upset, but she was too drunk to clearly communicate her distress. Despite Antonia's obvious unease, Martine continued to hug and try to kiss her. The other friends, also heavily intoxicated, failed to intervene. Eventually, they retreated to a bedroom, where the man assaulted she while she was in a dazed state. Antonia was confused and disoriented as Martine ignored her attempts to resist and stop him. After the incident, he rejoined his friends in the living room and continued the party, leaving Antonia alone in the bedroom. Later, around 9 a.m., she managed to call Benjamin, but her speech was slurred and she was crying uncontrollably, making it hard for him to understand her. She was unable to explain what had happened or where she was. Benjamin became concerned and called Consuela, telling her that Antonia was in trouble and needed help. Antonia then called Consuela herself, struggling to communicate, and eventually found out her location, prompting Consuela to go to her aid. When Consuela met Martine at the doorstep, she asked him what had happened, but he just smiled and claimed that everything was consensual. However, when Consuela found her friend, Antonia, in one of the rooms, she was shocked by her condition. Antonia was crying and begged to be taken away from the place as soon as possible. They left shortly after and went home, where Antonia immediately took a shower. Despite her friend's advice to preserve the evidence and report the incident to the police, Antonia insisted that no one should ever find out what had happened. She tried to act normally when she spoke to her parents later that day, hiding her true emotions. The next morning, Antonia and her friends returned to the student dormitory. In the aftermath, Antonia struggled to cope with the trauma. She tried to forget the nightmare and resume her normal life, attending classes and socializing with friends. However, only Consuela noticed that Antonia was not okay. As time passed, Antonia's mental state deteriorated, and she gradually fell into a deep depression. Antonia was traumatized and didn't want to talk to anyone about what had happened to her. She refused to file a police report, fearing that it would only spread the news and make things worse. However, rumors about her began to circulate quickly. They would whisper, point, and laugh at her. One of her classmates even had the audacity to ask her about the rumors in front of everyone. However, what sent Antonia over the edge was a phone call from Rodrigo, her ex-boyfriend, with whom she still had strong feelings and had been holding on to the hope of rekindling their relationship. During the call, Rodrigo repeated all the rumors he had heard and told Antonia that he never wanted to see her again. Antonia broke down in tears, trying to defend herself and explain that the rumors were not true. But Rodrigo was unforgiving, using derogatory language to describe her and calling her promiscuous before hanging up. This conversation was devastating for Antonia, and she couldn't cope with the emotional pain. On Saturday, October 12, 2019, Antonia went to her parents' house, seeking comfort and solace with her family. Concern for Antonia's well-being grew as her relatives noticed a deep sadness in her eyes, despite her claims that everything was okay. Later that evening, she posted old childhood photos on social media, accompanied by a distressing message. The following day, after dinner with her family, Antonia retreated to her room on the third floor. Her sister Catalina checked on her about an hour later, but Antonia asked to be left alone, saying she wanted to sleep. Catalina granted her wish, turned off the light, and bid her a loving goodbye before leaving the room. 2 hours passed before their mother, Marcela, came to Antonia's room to announce that dinner was ready. After knocking on the door with no response, Marcela entered the room and initially thought Antonia was asleep. However, upon touching her hand, she was met with an unsettling stillness. Devastated, Marcela screamed for help, and the rest of the household rushed to the room. In a state of panic, they called for emergency services while attempting to revive Antonia on their own before medical professionals arrived. Antonia's situation had become hopeless, and she tragically took her own life by overdosing on sleeping pills. The investigation into her death and the first attempts to hold the perpetrator accountable began. The news shocked her family and friends, as many were unaware of the severe emotional distress Antonia had been experiencing. As Antonia's parents sought to understand what had happened to their daughter, they spoke with her friends and classmates. They were shocked by the rumors and gossip that had been circulating about Antonia. Consuela, in particular, shared everything she knew, but the parents felt that more needed to be done. They hired a top private detective to help reconstruct the events leading up to Antonia's death and gather evidence to bring the person responsible to justice. Alejandro, determined to seek justice for his daughter, used his connections to organize a press conference. In front of dozens of cameras, he shared the devastating truth: his daughter had been the victim of forced bullying, which she had been unable to survive. The person responsible, he emphasized, remained at large. The detective reconstructed the timeline of events from that fateful night and gathered statements from several key witnesses, including Consuela, Benjamin, and a few other university students, who were willing to testify in court. With all the evidence collected, the Antonia family petitioned the court to arrest and prosecute Martín for his actions. However, the police determined that the evidence presented was insufficient to warrant taking him into custody. Martín claimed that everything that happened was consensual, although he admitted that both parties were intoxicated. Furthermore, the victim did not report the incident to the police. As a result, Martín remained free, and he and his family subsequently filed a lawsuit against the Antonia family, accusing them of defamation, harassment, and the unauthorized disclosure of their personal information. According to the Martín family, Antonia's relatives had slandered their son and brother, Martín. In response, the Martín family decided to hold a press conference to defend themselves publicly. They argued that Martín's reputation had been harmed without justification and presented themselves as the ones who had been wronged. The Martín family also accused Antonia of sharing their personal contact information, including their home address, phone numbers, and social media handles. As a result, Martín and his family received daily insults and anonymous death threats. The Martín family maintained that Martín's guilt had not been proven and that everything had happened by mutual consent. They expressed their willingness to defend Martín's case in court. Surprisingly, after this statement, the police supported the Martín family, causing Antonia's relatives to stop making negative comments about them and to stop sharing personal data. This sudden change was a major blow. This unexpected turn of events was a significant setback. Despite this, Antonia's relatives continued to seek justice with the support of the public. Victims who were initially silent about their experiences began speaking out after Antonia's case gained widespread public attention. Within a month, 8 more girls came forward to the police, claiming they too had been harassed and assaulted by Martín. They had previously remained silent, fearing they would be condemned and censured. One of the victims was just 13 years old at the time of the assault. As more girls who suffered at the hands of Martín began contacting the police, he was eventually taken into custody. Martín was arrested in June 2020 and held at Temuco City Prison on suspicion of committing assaults between 2011 and 2019. However, Martín was released on his own recognizance less than a month after his lawyer intervened, and was allowed to remain free for the duration of the investigation. Furthermore, several lawsuits filed by the injured girls were rejected due to the statute of limitations having expired. There was a high likelihood that many cases would be disregarded. Out of 8 appeals, only 2 were registered by the court. The release of Martín from custody and the rejection of the victim's claims sparked widespread outrage. Protests and rallies erupted nationwide, with thousands demanding justice. In response, the prosecutor's office re-examined the case and pushed for a change in Martín's bail conditions, seeking to return him to custody. Meanwhile, the statute of limitations was lifted for all cases of violence committed by Martin. During his trial in February 2021, his social media messages were revealed, in which he boasted about his actions to friends. It was also discovered that Martin kept a collection of his victims' underwear at home, taken as trophies. This collection included items from victims who had previously reported him to the court, as well as a belonging of Antonia's. On August 26, 2021, Martin was charged with 9 counts of crimes involving sexual misconduct. 3 of the victims were minors when the incidents occurred. The Antonia family appealed to the public to speak out against violence and bring those responsible to justice. The trial began in June 2022, allowing Martin's lawyers sufficient time to prepare. They presented witness statements and surveillance footage showing that Antonia left with the defendant voluntarily and did not attempt to resist him. The defense challenged the testimonies of other victims, but in August 2022, the court delivered a guilty verdict against Martin. He was convicted of 8 crimes involving sexual misconduct and causing Antonia's nervous breakdown, which ultimately led to her death. Martin was sentenced to 20 years in prison. However, his lawyers, led by Pinus, promptly filed an appeal. On December 29, the Supreme Court ordered a new trial. In March 2023, Martin's case was assigned to the Public Defender's Office. During the new trial, Martin maintained his innocence, attributing the events leading to Antonia's death to the large quantity of alcohol they had consumed together. Despite this, on July 7, 2023, Martin was found guilty again. The court reduced his initial 20-year sentence to 17 years, considering the 3 years he had already spent in prison. He had only 14 years left to serve. However, Antonia's family expressed dissatisfaction with this decision in an official press release made by her father. They noted that no punishment could bring back their daughter. During the ongoing lawsuits, Antonia's family and other victims affected by Martin's actions joined forces with public figures to advocate for women's rights. Together, they worked to amend the criminal code, specifically the sections related to sexual offenses. Their objective was to protect the rights of victims of harassment and sexual violence. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Abril Perez Sagayan. Abril Perez Sagayan was born in 1971 in Monterrey, Nuevo León, Mexico. Her mother, Maria del Socorro, worked diligently 7 days a week to ensure her 3 children, Abril, Javier, and Anna, had the opportunity for the best possible education and a bright future. Even at a young age, Abril displayed an exceptional aptitude for science and made it her goal to pursue higher education and financial independence. As Abril matured, she embodied a unique combination of intelligence, compassion, and physical beauty. Her sociable nature and innate leadership qualities made her an inspiration to her friends and a standout professional in her field. She earned a bachelor's degree from the University of Nuevo León and a master's degree in business from the Monterrey Institute of Technology. As Abril's career progressed, she discovered her passion for digital sales and rapidly climbed the ranks. She attained a prominent position as an executive director at Bilbao Bank in the United States. During the early 1990s, a time when Abril's professional accomplishments were flourishing, she met Juan Carlos Garcia Sanchez. Juan Carlos was an ambitious entrepreneur, born on November 11, 1968. Juan Carlos and Abril discovered they had a lot in common. Both had attended the Monterrey Institute of Science and Technology, where Abril studied and Juan Carlos earned his degree with high academic achievement. Juan Carlos had also studied at top U.S. universities, including the University of Pennsylvania and Harvard. With his education and experience, he considered himself a professional entrepreneur in e-commerce and financial technology. Juan and Abril became inseparable, collaborating on projects and socializing in the same friend circle. As time passed, their friendship blossomed into romance. After a few years of dating, they decided to tie the knot, and their wedding took place in 1994. Their collaboration led to numerous successful projects, including the online stores Pag Mobile and Plascom. They also played a key role in the development of the Dem store, which became a leading e-commerce platform in Mexico. By 1999, their life appeared to be a perfect fairy tale, with both partners achieving great success in their careers and enjoying a happy relationship. Their joy was further amplified with the birth of their first child, Ana Cecilia, in 2001. 2 years later, they welcomed a son, Juan Carlos Jr., followed by another son, Julio Andres, in 2005. Despite their busy schedules, Abril prioritized her children's needs, taking care of them personally and attending their school activities. Abril's devotion earned her the respect and admiration of those around her. Juan Carlos was also a dedicated father, and together they created a seemingly ideal family that many people envied. However, behind the facade, the family was struggling with difficulties, and all members suffered due to Juan's short temper. Juan was a cruel man who frequently lashed out at anyone who crossed his path. His behavior towards his wife, Abril, began with verbal abuse, making her feel uncomfortable and hurt with his insulting words. Over time, the situation worsened, and Juan started using physical violence against Abril, regularly beating her. Abril attempted to conceal the abuse from her friends and family, fearing that she wouldn't be able to provide for their children on her own. She believed that staying with Juan would give their children a better future. However, by 2009, the situation had become so severe that others began to suspect what was happening in the family. Abril has always kept it a secret from her friends and family, but whenever they asked about a possible divorce, she insisted that she wouldn't leave Juan. By 2014, Juan had reached the pinnacle of his career, becoming a prominent figure in Amazon's retail industry in Mexico. A year later, when Juan became the director of Amazon in Mexico, the family had to relocate to Mexico City. Abril hoped that the change of scenery would resolve their problems, but unfortunately, the abuse continued. Juan Carlos presented himself as a loving husband and father to the public, but behind closed doors, he was abusive and controlling towards his wife, Abril. He would often post on social media about how much he loved her, but in reality, he was constantly accusing her of cheating and even hired a private investigator to gather evidence. Despite his successful career, which included becoming the director of e-commerce at a multinational company, his marriage was deteriorating. The tension between him and Abril became unbearable, and after a trip to Monterrey to celebrate Christmas with her family, she realized she couldn't stay in the marriage any longer. During the trip, Juan's anger boiled over, and he physically attacked Abril, grabbing her by the neck and strangling her. He had received a photo from the private investigator of Abril with a male colleague, which he mistakenly believed was her lover. In reality, the man was just a coworker. Abril decided not to engage with Juan's accusations and instead filed for divorce on January 4, 2019. They had already separated and planned to inform their children about their impending divorce. However, the situation took a violent turn one early morning. Abril was asleep when she was suddenly struck on the head with a baseball bat by her partner, Juan. Initially disoriented, Abril thought the ceiling had collapsed, but as her vision cleared, she saw Juan standing over her. She attempted to push him away and escape, but he overpowered her, prompting her to scream for help. Their 16-year-old son rushed to his mother's aid, quickly assessing the situation and intervening to prevent Juan from causing further harm. He managed to get Abril away from Juan and escorted her out of the house to seek emergency medical attention for her injuries. After the incident, Juan took to social media to share his side of the story. He made several posts claiming that Abril had been unfaithful, stolen his money, and wasted 26 years of his life. He also alleged that Abril had physically attacked him, stabbing him in the chest with a knife. To support his claims, he attached photos of the knife and what appeared to be bloodstains. One of Juan's friends responded by recording a video asking people to share the information. However, Juan's posts became increasingly bizarre. At one point, he even posted a message claiming that Abril had taken her life, despite being clearly alive. This move remains puzzling to this day. Meanwhile, Abril had been recovering in the hospital. After her discharge, she immediately filed a police report against her husband. The authorities sided with her, granting her custody of their 2 children and ordering Juan to pay 6,000 Mexican pesos, approximately $1,350, in monthly alimony. However, this amount was deemed insufficient to cover the costs of raising their 2 minors. After overcoming her initial fear and financial struggles, Abril began a new chapter in her life, driven by her determination to create a better future for her children. She relocated to Monterrey with her kids, where she attended Juan Carlos' trial and filed for divorce. Reflecting on her traumatic experience and the abuse she suffered, Abril reevaluated her life. She joined a Christian organization that supported families and started working as a divorce counselor. Her ultimate goal was to establish a support system for women who had endured similar abuse, just as she had. As Abril worked towards rebuilding her life, the court proceedings against Juan Carlos continued. 9 months after the attack, Juan was formally charged with attempted murder. The case was then brought to court, where Judge Federico Mask ordered Juan's informal arrest. Consequently, Juan was incarcerated for several weeks. Juan appealed the verdict, and on November 3, 2019, Judge Hector Jimenez reviewed the case. He found the hospital photographs and Abril's testimony, along with that of her son, insufficient to prove Juan's guilt. The judge also believed that if Juan had intended to kill Abril, he would have done so. Additionally, he considered the baseball bat used in the attack to be a blunt object, rather than a deadly weapon. As a result, the charges were downgraded, and the preliminary arrest was cancelled. With only a few hearings remaining, the outcome of the case was uncertain, causing Abril and her loved one significant anxiety and frustration. In a desperate attempt to have her concerns heard, Abril wrote to the judge, expressing her fears for her life and pleading for him to consider the threat Juan posed. However, her letter was ignored. Juan then began a custody battle for their children. Abril was forced to leave Monterrey and travel to Mexico City for the remaining hearings. She also had to subject her children to psychological evaluations, as Juan had claimed in his lawsuit that Abril had manipulated them into rejecting him. A week before a critical court hearing, Abril sat down with her 3 children to express her love and wishes for their future. She encouraged them to chase their dreams and find the strength to forgive their father. This conversation seemed like a farewell, as if Abril sensed that it might be her last opportunity to reassure her children of her love. On November 25, 2019, Abril followed her ex-husband's instructions to avoid potential legal issues that could have led to her separation from her children. She traveled to Mexico City, coincidentally on the same day that thousands of women marched in the streets to commemorate the International Day Against Gender-Based Violence on March 19, 2021. The court reclassified a case involving violence against Abril, which occurred in January 2019, as attempted murder. This decision was made after Abril's relatives and the prosecutor filed several petitions for judicial review, ultimately leading to the cancellation of the original decision. 2 months later, on May 23, the remaining suspects in Abril's murder case were apprehended, including 3 women and 1 man. The investigation resulted in the issuance of 3 search warrants and 8 arrest warrants. During the first search, 48-year-old Amanda Vicente Rodriguez was taken into custody. A series of arrests were made in connection with a recent crime. In the Jardín de Morelos colony, 34-year-old Mabel Montelier Morena and 48-year-old Garcia Alicia Flores Valdez were taken into custody, and their mobile phones were seized. Another arrest was made in the Alvar Aragon colony in Mexico City, where 50-year-old Isa Jalil Castillo, also known as Aguirre or Alvar's godmother, was detained. At the same time, 9 gang members were apprehended, with 7 of them allegedly linked to the Abril case. However, one suspect, Juan Carlos, remained at large, prompting authorities to reissue a warrant for his arrest. General Prosecutor Ernesto Godoy explained that the initial warrant was for attempted murder, while the new one was for the actual killing of a woman. Despite efforts to locate Juan, he remained elusive. In a surprising turn of events, a man named Rolf, also known as El Chalón, contacted the authorities and claimed to have information about the case. During questioning, he revealed that he was the one who had actually pulled the trigger and taken Abril's life. The perpetrator, Rodolfo Daniel Bendis, eventually pleaded guilty to the crime. He claimed that Juan Carlos had promised to pay him $10,000 to carry out the crime. According to Bendis, Juan Carlos had contacted him while he was in pre-trial detention and provided him with the address of Abril in Mexico City. Juan Carlos allegedly instructed Bendis to spy on Abril and provided written instructions on how to commit the crime. He also promised to provide Bendis with a gun in Monterrey. However, when Bendis arrived in Monterrey, no one contacted him, and he did not receive the gun. He returned to Mexico City and did not hear from Juan Carlos again until after his release from prison. Upon his release, Juan Carlos contacted Bendis again and informed him that the plan had changed. He now wanted Abril to be killed in Mexico City, as he had managed to lure her there. The case was divided into multiple hearings due to the complexity of the judicial system. The first trial began in August 2022, with Bendis and Juan Carlos as the initial defendants. During this trial, the prosecution presented 28 witness statements and 14 pieces of expert evidence. During the recent trial, a key defendant known as El Shung Gallen testified about his role in planning and committing the crime of feminicide, for which he had previously pleaded guilty. On May 19, 2023, the court delivered its verdict, finding Rodolfo Danielo Baza and Juan Carlos Rodriguez guilty and sentencing them to 52 years in prison. Additionally, they were ordered to pay approximately 56,000 Mexican pesos, $30,000 US, in damages. Following the trial, the men were taken to a detention center to begin serving their sentences. However, the Abril family immediately announced their intention to appeal the verdict, as they believed the sentence was too lenient. They pointed out that Rodolfo was the one who fired the fatal shots. As for the remaining defendants, it was previously decided in October 2014 that their trials would be divided. This decision was met with an appeal from prosecutors, who argued that it would significantly delay the proceedings and result in unnecessary additional costs for the court. The tragic case of Abril continues to affect her family and the wider Mexican society, and despite the recent verdict, the trials are not yet over. After the court hearing, Abril got into a car with her children and their lawyer. She asked the lawyer to drive them to the airport for their flight back to Monterrey. En route, they stopped at an intersection, where a motorcyclist pulled up beside them. The motorcyclist, who was actually a hired assassin, shot Abril multiple times in the head. Luckily, her children, who were seated in the back, escaped serious harm. One child, who was lying down, was grazed by a bullet but suffered only minor injury. Abril was rushed to the hospital, where doctors fought to save her life. Despite their efforts, she succumbed to her injuries 6 hours later. The lawyer immediately contacted Abril's family to inform them of the tragedy. Her brother Javier traveled to Mexico City to handle the aftermath of the incident. The community suspected Juan Carlos of being involved in the crime, but the authorities took a different stance. Since the shooter's identity and motives were unknown, they couldn't classify the case as femicide and make an arrest. Instead, the case was initially treated as a murder, and the police launched an investigation to gather evidence that could potentially prove it was a femicide. Abril's friend took to social media to accuse Juan Carlos, but her account was deleted as a result. Abril's family was fearful that the perpetrator would go unpunished and sought to raise public awareness about the case through social media. The fact that Abril died on a day dedicated to fighting gender-based violence added a deeper significance to her death. The family organized protests and marches to demand justice for Abril. Following Abril's tragic death, social media erupted in outrage as people realized that she had repeatedly expressed her fear of her abuser, only to be ignored by the authorities. Her family and friends held a funeral mass at the Benito Flores Chapel in Monterrey, where dozens gathered to pay their respects and demand justice for Abril. The funeral procession then proceeded to the Pantheon Garden in Los Angeles, where Abril was laid to rest. Her case has sparked widespread attention to the issue of gender-based violence, particularly in cases where judges release men who have attacked women. Abril's ex-husband, Juan Carlos, was released from prison after appealing his sentence and was able to track Abril down to Mexico City, where he ultimately took her life. In response to Abril's case, the Mexican General Prosecutor's Office has launched an investigation into the judges who allowed Juan Carlos to be released from prison. The judges in question, Carlos Trillo Rodriguez, Federico Mosa Gonzalez, and Hector Jimenez Lopez, are being investigated for their roles in Juan Carlos' release. Additionally, representatives of the party of former Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador are calling for Judge Mosa's removal from office, citing his involvement in a previous controversial case in which he released a doctor who had disrespected a patient in a public hospital. The judge initially declined to charge Juan Carlos with femicide, instead only charging him with sexual violence, after which he was released from custody. During the public outcry surrounding the Abril case, Rafael Guerra, the president of the Supreme Court of Mexico City, suspended all judges involved in the case on November 29. Mexico City's head of government, Claudia Sheinbaum, stated that the government would investigate Abril's death. She also warned that the judges involved in the case could be held accountable for Abril's death if it was proven that Juan Carlos was responsible. Local and international media reported that Juan Carlos was released despite evidence against him. Abril's family established a non-profit organization called The Voice of Abril to provide support to victims of violence, including information, psychological assistance, and legal aid. The public demonstrations sparked by Abril's death prompted the prosecutor's office to reclassify the case against Juan Carlos, seeking to prosecute him for attempted murder, which could result in his imprisonment. After being charged, Juan Carlos took to social media to claim that he wanted justice for the crime against Abril and that the perpetrator should be punished. He also stated that he was willing to cooperate with the police, despite having a troubled marriage with Abril, and he would never have wanted her to meet such a tragic end. However, his post sparked widespread discontent among the community. His 18-year-old daughter, Ana Cecilia, publicly spoke out against her father, accusing him of physically and mentally abusing her, her siblings, and Abril over the years. She shared disturbing photos of Abril's injuries after being attacked with a baseball bat. Ana described her father as a narcissistic sociopath who allegedly bribed his way out of prison. During the ongoing investigation and protests, an arrest warrant was issued for Juan Carlos, but it was not directly related to the Abril case. Instead, it was due to him violating judicial duties. Although he was released on the condition that he would check in with the police station weekly, he failed to do so. After missing 2 court hearings, Judge Agustin Monra Gaspar Canel was left with no choice but to issue the order. Juan wrote a letter claiming he feared for his life and did not want to attend the hearings, stating he and his family had received death threats since Abril's death. He believed someone would seek revenge if he appeared in court. However, the judge rejected this excuse and issued an arrest warrant, also restricting Juan from leaving the country. The investigation continued, aiming to uncover the truth. A letter from Juan was discovered, in which he again denied involvement in Abril's death, claiming he never intended to harm her. He described the night of the incident, stating that Abril had initiated a fight, stabbing him in the side, and he had hit her with a bat in self-defense. The letter sparked outrage among those who heard it, with no one believing Juan's account. The investigation has revealed that Juan Carlos is the primary suspect in the case. Further investigation by the police has identified at least 7 other individuals involved in the crime against Abril. This conclusion was reached after reviewing surveillance footage from the area where the events occurred. The footage shows 2 cars following Abril as she left the courthouse. The drivers of these cars were in contact with the perpetrator who fatally shot Abril. After the attack, the perpetrator and their cars fled the scene. Although the identities of the pursuers were not yet known at the time, the investigation suggested that Juan Carlos may have been involved in the crime. According to investigators, Juan Carlos likely met these individuals while he was in prison and paid one of them to protect him. After his associates were released from prison, Juan Carlos was also released. He then paid them to kill Abril. Notably, Juan Carlos was the only one who knew Abril's route to Mexico City, as he had requested to meet her. After the shocking details of the case became public, no law firm was willing to defend the suspect, Juan Carlos. Meanwhile, Abril's loved ones and colleagues cooperated fully with law enforcement, providing any information that could aid in his capture. However, sources from the General Prosecutor's Office soon revealed that Juan Carlos had managed to flee Mexico by crossing the border into the United States. Mexican authorities swiftly alerted Interpol, which launched a global manhunt for Juan Carlos. As a result, he became a wanted man in over 151 countries, with authorities determined to apprehend him at all costs. By the end of January 2024, the case had gone cold, with no new leads or updates. 4 years have passed since Abril's tragic death, yet the true perpetrators remain unpunished. Her children are now living with her family on the outskirts of Mexico City, holding on to the hope that justice will eventually be served. The question on everyone's mind remains, where is Juan Carlos? His capture is still the top priority for the authorities. Abril's family has vowed to continue fighting for justice until Juan Carlos is found and brought to justice. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Su Xingqi. Tam Xing Fai, a 43-years-old faculty member, was noticeably absent from work, sparking concern among his colleagues. On July 4th, a coworker named Ma tried to reach him on his mobile phone at 11 a.m., but there was no answer. Ma wasn't immediately worried, assuming Tam Xing Fai was busy taking care of his family's adopted dog, which had a skin disease and was scheduled to visit the vet. However, when Xing Fai failed to show up for a meeting at the university's finance department on July 5th, Ma's concern grew. He tried calling Xing Fai's mobile phone again, but there was still no answer. Unfortunately, Ma didn't have Xing Fai's landline phone number, so he couldn't try contacting him that way. By July 6th, Xing Fai had been absent from work for 2 days with no communication with his colleagues. One of his co-workers finally reported the situation to the finance department, which prompted Xing Fai's superiors to call his landline phone. Unfortunately, no one answered that call either. The police contacted the library where Helen Tong Yenyi, the 33-years-old wife of the missing man. Library staff reported that she was also absent from work without prior notice. They, originally from Zhongshan in Guangdong Province, China, had been married for 11 years and had 2 daughters, Hiu Man, 10, and Hiu Ing, 7 years old. Despite their difficult living conditions and financial struggles, the family was known to be kind, happy, and cheerful. They lived in an abandoned recycling station on Huazhu South Road, but Xing Fai often took his daughters on outings to have fun in town. Their children were well behaved, and the family seemed to be a happy one. Given their circumstances, it was possible that the family had decided to take a vacation together. However, something unexpected must have happened, preventing them from returning. Xing Fai's colleagues repeatedly tried to contact him by phone, hoping for a response. Eventually, someone answered, but to their surprise, it was a middle-aged man with an unfamiliar voice, not a member of the family. A man claiming to be Xing Fai's cousin called his workplace, stating that the family had taken a summer vacation to Guangdong province in mainland China. He allegedly received Xing Fai's phone for safekeeping, but couldn't provide a return date for the family. However, the call only heightened suspicion among Xing Fai's co-workers. They found it out of character for Xing Fai to suddenly leave without notice, as he was a diligent and organized person. If he planned a vacation, he would have arranged it with his children's school in advance. Moreover, the family was responsible for 9 stray dogs, raising concerns about who would care for them. Xing Fai's family situation also raised questions. His father, a sailor, had gone missing, and his mother was living in a nursing home due to illness. Xing Fai regularly visited her every week, making it unlikely that he would abandon her to go on vacation. Eventually, the police were called. One of Xing Fai's colleagues accompanied them to his home, an abandoned recycling station in Pingqi village. During the trip, a suspicious person was spotted. A short man was seen from a distance near the Xing Fai family's fence before quickly disappearing. Initially, no attention was paid to this, and they continued on. Upon arrival, they found the gate to Xing Fai's home locked. The police investigated the property and interviewed the neighbors. The abandoned recycling station covered a large area of approximately 450 square meters, but most of it was empty space, about 350 square meters of flower beds. The construction area was only about 90 square meters, and the building was constructed illegally. The original owner had built several tin houses on the site, using it as a waste recycling facility. A stone house on the opposite side was used as a pig farm, with very few people living in the area. As a result, the police only had one neighbor to question, an elderly woman named Wang who lived alone across the street. Wang claimed to have known the family's schedule and reported that they usually tended to their garden in the afternoon. Su Wang had limited knowledge of the family's personal lives, mainly due to their remote location. She was aware that the family didn't receive many visitors, and the only relative she knew of was Xing Fai's cousin, Su Xingqi. Wang didn't have information about Su Xingqi's address or that of Xing Fai's uncle, who supposedly lived in a nearby stone house. When the police questioned Xing Fai's colleague, they learned that a cousin had answered Xing Fai's phone, leading the police to believe it was Su Xingqi. However, Wang clarified that she didn't know Su Xingqi's address. She did report hearing cries for help from the house on July 5th. In response, the police conducted door-to-door inquiries in Pingqi village and eventually tracked down a man matching Wang's description at a stone house on Huazhu Road. The man, 42 years old Zhu Shenqi, confirmed that he was Xing Fai's cousin and stated that he occasionally visited the family home to help with renovations and gardening. When questioned about the phone call, Su Xingqi maintained that the family had gone on vacation to China. On July 5th, Xing Fai visited his mother at the nursing home and then returned home to inform Su Xingqi that he planned to travel to Danyuan, China for a few days. Due to the high roaming fees, Xing Fai asked Su Xingqi to hold on to his Hong Kong mobile phone until he returned. The person seen fleeing the scene by police and Xing Fai's colleague was actually Su Xingqi, who was leaving after feeding the family dogs. Su Xingqi's behavior and expressions were observed, and he appeared to be telling the truth. His story seemed consistent, and there were no obvious discrepancies. When asked if he had a key to the family home, Su Xingqi denied it. Despite finding Su Xingqi, the police continued their investigation, going door to door in the village. A local resident reported a stranger borrowed money from a villager, leading to a heated argument. The villager threatened to seek compensation from Xing Fai's family, who were struggling financially due to his mother's hospitalization and existing debts. The villagers initially believed the stranger was not Su Xingqi, but they suspected the family might be hiding to escape their debts. However, when the police inquired about Su Xingqi, the villagers revealed that he had been dishonest. They confirmed that Su Xingqi regularly visited the Xing Fai's home to perform maintenance and repairs, and he was always able to enter the house on his own, even when no one else was present. This information led the police to conclude that Su Xingqi must have had a key or access to the home Xing Fai's. In fact, he did have a key, which Xing Fai had given to him, as witnessed by Wang. When the police asked Su Xingqi for the key, he initially denied owning one, claiming he used a spare key for renovations that he had returned. However, his demeanor had changed, and he was avoiding key details. When the police threatened to search his home, Su Xingqi became agitated and suddenly remembered another house key that he had not returned. He retrieved the key from his dresser and handed it over to the police. Although Su Xingqi's behavior was suspicious, there was no direct evidence linking him to the family's disappearance. As a result, the police placed him under surveillance while continuing their investigation. During their investigation, police used a spare key to enter the home, where they found a scene of disarray and evidence of a ransacking. Fresh blood stains on the walls suggested that a violent incident had occurred on the property. The presence of a sink full of dirty dishes in the kitchen raised suspicions about the family's claim to have traveled to China, as it seemed unlikely they would have left their home in such a state before departing. A search of the master bedroom turned up the family's identification cards in a dresser, which prompted the lead investigator to contact the border crossing office. The office reported that the family had not left Hong Kong. Further investigation of the house uncovered a blood-stained shirt in a side room and a blood-stained plastic water pipe in the corner. Police then deployed sniffer dogs to search for additional evidence and potentially locate the missing family members. The dogs detected a scent and discovered blood stains under recently disturbed soil 9 meters away. Furthermore, despite it being summer vacation, their children, Hiu Man and Hiu Wayne, were enrolled in summer school, indicating that the family would not have been on vacation. It became clear that the family had been victims of a crime, so a special team was set up to investigate. Due to the late hour, the police cordoned off the scene, restricted access to Pingqi village. Su Xingqi was confined to home. He was the prime suspect in the case. Su Xingqi promptly confessed. According to Su Xingqi's statement, he was from Huanpu in Guangdong province and typically resided with his sister, wife, and 2 sons, aged 15 and 16, who suffered from memory issues. Su Xingqi previously earned a living selling motorcycles in Junction City. However, following Guangdong's ban on motorcycles in 2006, sales plummeted. Financial struggles led him to reach out to his cousin, Xing Fai, in Hong Kong, seeking employment opportunities. Xing Fai helped Su Xingqi secure a construction job that provided a daily salary of 500 Hong Kong dollars, including accommodation and meals. After working for half a month, Su Xingqi became dissatisfied with his salary, which was reduced to 220 Hong Kong dollars due to company deductions. He impulsively quit his job and returned to China. However, in 2007, a typhoon damaged his home, and he needed money for repairs. Su Xingqi asked Xing Fai to help him find work in Hong Kong again. When Xing Fai couldn't find him a job, he proposed an alternative arrangement. Xing Fai would pay Su Xingqi from his own salary to help with household chores and repairs at his home. Su Xingqi accepted this offer and began traveling to Hong Kong every other month to work on Xing Fai's home and garden. Su Xingqi claims that he and Tong Yanyi, Xing Fai's wife, began a clandestine romantic relationship. However, Xing Fai discovered their relationship on July 3. On July 5th, Su Xingqi accompanied Xing Fai to a nursing home to visit his mother. Su Xingqi snuck out of the nursing home to return home and continue his affair with Yan Yi. Unexpectedly, Xing Fai returned home early and, in a fit of rage, physically confronted Su Xingqi. In a state of panic, the man grabbed a 25-centimeter-long fruit knife and stabbed Xing Fai until he fell to the ground, dead. Overwhelmed by what had just happened, he wanted to turn himself in to the police. However, Su Xingqi refused to let that happen. Since he couldn't change his mind, Su Xingqi decided to kill Xing Fai. Su Xingqi found some wires in the corner of the room, charged at him, knocked him to the ground, and tied his hands behind his back. Su Xingqi then covered Xing Fai's mouth and nose with tape and put a plastic bag over his head. Before this, their 2 children were in their bedroom watching cartoons. They heard the commotion and their parents warning to run away, but instead, they ran towards their parents and saw their father dead and Su Xingqi in the process of killing their mother. The children ran back to their room, crying, and locked the door. Since the parent was already tied up, Su Xingqi left to pursue the children. Su Xingqi picked up a pair of pliers, opened the door, and used more wires to restrain the children. He tied their hands behind their backs, covered their mouths and noses with tape, and put plastic bags over their heads. The children, Hiu Ing and Hiu Man, also suffocated shortly after. After killing the whole family, Su Xingqi was at a loss of what to do next. He turned to his home to think it over. He thought that hiding them in a ditch or body of water would be too easy to find, and that dismembering them would be too exhausting and time-consuming. So he settled on burying them on their own property. On July 6th, he returned to the home to try and clean up as many blood stains as he could find. He then got to work on digging the hole. He dug a hole deep and wide enough to hold the family of 4 and quickly placed their bodies inside of it. He also disposed of the murder weapons in the pit before filling it back in. The police believed Su Xingqi's story, despite being skeptical about his motive, and took him to the location where he claimed the crime had taken place. He pointed out the spot where the sharp knife, water pipe, iron pliers, and other tools used in the crime were hidden. On July 7th, the police called in the fire department to assist in unearthing the remains. The firefighters arrived with excavation tools and gas masks, as the bodies were buried near a septic tank. However, they quickly encountered a problem when they hit a layer of cement while digging. It turned out that Su Xingqi had failed to mention in his confession that he had filled the pit with cement before covering it up. The firefighters were unable to break through the cement with their tools, and the police had to call in a private engineering company for assistance. The engineers arrived with high-grade tools and began drilling through the concrete slab. However, when they reached a point where they saw human hair, they became uneasy and refused to continue digging, not wanting to encounter a dead body. It took the police 13 hours to persuade them to resume the excavation. After excavating the pit, authorities found it to be 2.5 meters wide and 6 feet deep. The bodies of the 4 family members were discovered at the bottom, all barefoot and wearing only t-shirts and shorts. Xing Fai's body was at the very bottom. His hands and feet were bound with electric wire, and he had multiple stab wounds to his abdomen, back, and neck, with his clothes stained red with blood. The other family members were similarly bound with electric wire. Yan Yi's mouth and nose were covered with tape, her hands and feet were bound, and her face was distorted. 2 family members, Hiu Man and Hiu Ing, showed no obvious signs of trauma, leading police to suspect they may have been buried alive. Su Xingqi was formally arrested and interrogated. During the interrogation, he altered his confession. He admitted that he lied about the affair. Shan Hui kicked Su Xingqi out of the house and banned him from returning. Despite this, Su Xingqi came back to apologize and was surprisingly forgiven by Xing Fai. Su Xingqi returned to the house on July 3rd to start working, and it seemed that his relationship with Xing Fai had been repaired. However, on July 4th, Su Xingqi attempted to molest a family member. Su Xingqi fled the house in a rage, not wanting to alert the neighbors. The next day, Su Xingqi tried to force his way into the house again, claiming he wanted to apologize. However, Xing Fai had anticipated this and returned home early. They got into an argument, which escalated into Su Xingqi stabbing Xing Fai. Su Xingqi's later confession matched his initial one, but with the additional detail of filling a makeshift grave with cement. However, after the bodies were taken away for autopsy, it was discovered that Su Xingqi's account of the events was inaccurate. The autopsy revealed that Xing Fai's murder was more brutal than initially described. Xing Fai had sustained 9 stab wounds to the head and neck, nearly 80 stab wounds to the body, and 10 stab wounds to the hands and feet. Contrary to Su Xingqi's claim, Xing Fai was strangled, not suffocated with a plastic bag. Hiu Ying's cause of death was the only accurate part of Su Xingqi's account. Forensic analysis of the home found at the cutlery and dishes did not have the family's DNA on them, but they did have Su Xingqi's DNA. This suggested that Xing Fai was not killed in the kitchen, but rather elsewhere in the house. The investigation also revealed that the murder was premeditated, as the cement used to bury the bodies had been purchased by Su Xingqi prior to the murder. Furthermore, the weapon used was not a kitchen knife from the family, but rather one belonging to Su Xingqi. Additional investigations by the police found that the family's bank cards had been used at an ATM after the time of death, but no money could be withdrawn due to repeated failed PIN number guesses. The cash and bank cards belonging to the family were also missing. Su Xingqi's motive for the crime was robbery, and it was premeditated. Whenever the police pointed out inconsistencies in his story, he would suddenly come up with a new explanation. According to Su Xingqi, his family's ancestral home in China needed urgent repairs, and his 2 children required 100,000 in cash to cover their school fees. He was not well liked in his local community, so he knew it would be difficult to borrow money from his neighbors. He turned to Xing Fai for help because his business trips to Hong Kong had not generated enough income. Su Xingqi suspected that Su Xingqi was wealthier than he seemed and that he is very stingy. The reason for his low salary during his time working for Xing Fai was that they were exploiting him for low-cost labor. On July 3rd, Su Xingqi traveled to Hong Kong without informing anyone and waited until July 5th, when they had a day off from work. When Xing Fai returned home and found Su Xingqi there, he asked if he needed to cook something, and they men went to the kitchen together. Su Xingqi asked to borrow 1 million Hong Kong dollars, but Xing Fai rejected the request. He explained that he had to use the money for his mother's medical treatment and his daughter's education. However, Su Xingqi didn't believe him and accused Xing Fai of only using him for cost labor. Xing Fai became angry and ordered Su Xingqi to leave. As Xing Fai turned his back, with a concealed knife on Xingqi attacked him from behind, covering his mouth and stabbing him. Su Xingqi then restrained in Hiu Ying and Hiu Man and began searching the house for cash and bank cards. He demanded to know the password for the bank cards, and Xing Fai intentionally gave him a fake password. Su Xingqi didn't realize this at the time. Su Xingqi claimed that he had killed others by covering their mouths and noses with tape and putting a plastic bag over their head. However, when he went to the nearest ATM to withdraw cash, he discovered that the PIN number he had been given didn't work, and realized that Xing Fai had lied to him. Upon returning home, Su Xingqi discovered that everyone had suffocated to death in his absence. He found the food he and the others had been preparing and decided to eat it next to the 4 corpses while contemplating how to dispose of the bodies. After stealing $6,000 in Hong Kong dollars from Xing Fai's body, Su Xingqi buried the corpses and tools in a small pit, then went to sleep at Xing Fai home. The next morning, Su Xingqi realized that the smell from the bodies might lead to their discovery, so he bought cement and returned to the home. He dug up the pit, poured in the cement, and refilled the hole. Su Xingqi then stayed at the home to answer any calls to Xing Fai's cell phone or house phone, telling callers that he was taking care of things while the Xing Fai family is on vacation. However, Su Xingqi did not expect his ruse to be uncovered so quickly. Even later, he continued to lie about many details, including when he bought the cement and the cause of Yan Yi's death. At this stage, the police didn't think they needed to continue obtaining an accurate confession. In their opinion, they had collected enough evidence to proceed. The trial took place at the Hong Kong High Court on October 28, 2010. Su Xingqi initially pleaded not guilty and altered his previous statement. He claimed that his original story about the affair was true and that Xing Fai was killed in self-defense, while Hiu Man and Hiu Ying were killed accidentally. The defendant stated that he had falsely confessed to extortion and murder brutality, which included physical abuse and suffocation. On November 23, the jury delivered a unanimous guilty verdict for the murders of Xing Fai and Yan Yi. However, the defendant was acquitted of murdering Hiu Ying. Despite this, the defendant received a life sentence for the 3 counts of murder and 1 count of manslaughter. The presiding judge criticized the defendant, describing him as lacking a conscience and being unrepentant. The judge also accused the defendant of fabricating the self-defense story and affair to tarnish the victims' reputations. After Xing Fai's family death, who lived in Hong Kong, surprisingly defended him. They accused Xing Fai of being a hypocrite and the real villain. According to them, Xing Fai was exploiting Su Xingqi for cheap labor and taking his money. However, the neighbors and residents of Ping Chi village were outraged by these claims, forcing Su Xingqi's family to move back to China to avoid the backlash. The crime was considered one of the most shocking in Hong Kong's history. The community showed an outpouring of support for the family Xing Fai's, with many visiting their home to offer condolences. Netizens also raised more than enough money to cover the funeral expenses. Additionally, the family's 9 stray dogs were adopted by another family. Every year on July 5th, the adoptive family would take the dogs for a walk in Ping Chi village, near the home of their former owners. On August 9, 2022, 55 years old Su Xingqi passed away in Hong Kong's Stanley Prison due to friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Ana Rosa Barrera. Ana Rosa Barrera, a 40-year-old woman. She lived in a commune in the Santa Maria department, near Córdoba City, in the province of Córdoba, Argentina. People close to her described Ana Rosa as a courageous and adventurous person who was not afraid to start over and move forward with determination. Reports indicate that Ana Rosa lived in a tent for 4 years, although the reasons for this are unclear. She worked at the Secretariat for Children, Adolescents, and Families in Córdoba, a job she truly enjoyed. Additionally, she and her partner, Marcelo Favio Ferretto, ran an upholstery workshop together. They met when Ana Rosa started working for Marcelo's business. By 2017, Ana Rosa and Marcelo had been in a 10-year relationship. They shared a common interest in Reiki, a practice that involves using the palms to promote physical, mental, and spiritual well-being. Despite this common point, they still have problems in the relationship. Ana Rosa and Marcelo each have 4 children from previous relationships. As for Ana Rosa's family, her parents, brothers, and sisters reside in Córdoba. About Marcelo, he was a wallpaper maker with a workshop near their home. People close to they described Marcelo as a jealous and controlling person, which annoyed Ana Rosa. On Sunday, May 28th, they visited relatives in Villa Land, but the trip was marred by a heated argument sparked by Marcelo checking Ana Rosa's phone. The argument continued at their home, with neighbors hearing them shout and insult each other until the early hours of Monday morning. Later that day, Marcelo reported Ana Rosa missing to the police, although the exact timing of the report is disputed in media accounts. Most reports agree that Marcelo filed the report at the 18th police station on Tuesday, May 30th. According to Marcelo, claimed to have woken up at 6 a.m. on Monday to find Ana Rosa already gone, which he thought was unusual since she typically got up early to feed their dogs before leaving the house. He repeated this account to both the police and the media. Marcelo said he last saw Ana Rosa on Sunday night and then Monday night before going to bed. According to some sources, Marcelo realized something was wrong when Ana Rosa's colleagues called him, wondering about her absence. They knew she would never miss work without a good reason. Marcelo recounted the events leading up to her disappearance, saying that on Monday, he came across Ana Rosa's white Chevrolet while running an errand at the local pharmacy. Not long after, police discovered an abandoned car on Rainier Avenue outside a beauty salon in the Santa Isabel neighborhood. The location is about halfway between their home and Ana Rosa's workplace. Inside the car were her belongings and keys, but her cell phone was nowhere to be found. According to Marcelo, he tried to contact her, their friends, and their children also left messages, but no one received a response. The last message Ana Rosa sent via WhatsApp was at 10:40 p.m. Sunday, May 28th. Ana Rosa's relatives all said that the circumstances surrounding Ana Rosa's disappearance are unclear. Marcelo has maintained regular contact with police since filing the report and has also attempted to locate Ana Rosa through social media and news outlets. In an interview with reporters, Marcelo shared Ana Rosa's plans on the day she went missing, which included an early morning swim at a gym and a scheduled appointment with a doctor. Marcelo emphasized that his primary concern is Ana Rosa's safe return home. Prosecutor Legendro Peralta Tanilo of Alta Gracia assumed control of the case, and the investigation commenced. Multiple theories were initially proposed, including the possibility of Ana Rosa being a victim of kidnapping, robbery, or revenge. The option of her leaving voluntarily was also considered. As part of the investigation, Marcelo testified for over 14 hours on Wednesday, May 31st. However, his statements became increasingly inconsistent, raising suspicions among investigators. Marcelo's claims raised suspicions among detectives due to inconsistencies and shifting demeanor. Initially, he was confident and gave frequent interviews, but later emphasized his innocence, providing unsolicited details and justifying himself by discussing his relationship with Ana Rosa. As time passed, Ana Rosa's loved ones became increasingly desperate due to the lack of progress in the search. Meanwhile, the investigative authorities persisted in their efforts to solve the case. The prosecutor leading the investigation was convinced that Marcelo was withholding information and urged the investigators to scrutinize him more thoroughly. On Friday, June 2nd, during another meeting with police officers, Marcelo's demeanor shifted. He became more composed. However, when detectives showed him data from cell phone towers that contradicted his alibi, Marcelo became dismayed and ultimately revealed the truth. He admitted to killing Ana Rosa, running her over, and then dismembering her body to get rid of the evidence. After confessing to the brutal crime, Marcelo revealed the location of the dismembered body of Ana Rosa. Following the Marcelo confession, the police, aided by a canine unit, found Ana Rosa's remains at approximately 2:30 p.m. in a hole dug by Marcelo on a dirt road in the countryside, near a factory. The location was familiar to Marcelo, as he frequently visited the area for work-related purposes. It became clear that Marcelo's previous statements were false, except for his mention of a quarrel that occurred early Monday morning. According to the reconstructed events, Marcelo and Ana Rosa had been arguing the entire weekend before she went missing. Marcelo's intense jealousy sparked the violence. In the heat of an argument, Marcelo used a sledgehammer to hit Ana Rosa multiple times until she died. He then tried to put her body in the car but failed. Instead, he used a knife to dismember her body. He placed Ana Rosa's remains in the car and began moving to her burial site. After pleading guilty, authorities conducted a search of the defendant and Ana Rosa's home on Friday, where they discovered various tools, including machetes and knives of various sizes. Marcelo was then arrested and facing charges of capital murder, a crime that could carry a sentence of life in prison. Prosecutor Peralta Atima explained that the defendant's statement, in which he took responsibility for the crime, was not considered a formal confession. Instead, the record shows that he admitted to the crime during an interview as a witness. A formal statement will be made in the coming days, once sufficient evidence is gathered to support the charges. This evidence will include the final autopsy report, forensic analysis of vehicles and items found during searches, and the results of luminal tests. Marcelo's lawyer, Jose Luis Saca, stated that the police statement had no legal weight and could not as evidence. Furthermore, the defense announced that the defendant would not testify. Over the weekend, investigations continued, and on June 5, the preliminary autopsy report was released. The report concluded that Ana Rosa's cause of death was severe head trauma. On June 9, it was discovered that luminol tests had been conducted at the home where Ana Rosa and Marcelo lived. The tests showed a large amount of blood had been cleaned up. The medical examiners also discovered new details during the autopsy, including knife cuts on the victim's extremities. A cut, 18 centimeters long and 7 centimeters deep, was found on the victim's neck, reaching the cervical region. Based on these findings, the prosecutor's office charged Marcelo with double aggravated murder. Almost 2 years after Ana Rosa's murder, Marcelo's trial began. The prosecution explained the seriousness of the charges to the jury. According to the autopsy results, Ana Rosa suffered a severe initial blow to the face, which left her unconscious, followed by multiple blows to the head that crushed her skull. At the first hearing, Marcelo decided to stay silent. The court then heard testimony from witnesses. Deborah Territorios, Ana Rosa's daughter, testified that after her mother met Marcelo, she became increasingly distant from her children and other family members. Deborah stated that she and her father moved to a different city, followed by her older siblings, which made it harder for them to communicate with their mother. However, when Deborah spent time alone with her mother, Ana Rosa was loving and caring. But whenever Marcelo was around, her mother would pull away. Deborah even had to leave her mother's house quickly on occasion because Marcelo was expected to arrive soon. Ana Rosa's cousin, Roberto Enrique Reina, also testified. He witnessed their argument on May 28, 2017, which started at his house. According to Roberto, the argument began when Marcelo saw a message on Ana Rosa's phone. The prosecutor's indictment highlights Marcelo's control over Ana Rosa, including a power imbalance in their relationship and objectifying her in front of others. Fernando, a co-worker and friend of the victim, Ana Rosa, explained that after she started dating Marcelo, she initially grew distant from everyone, but then she tried to reconnect. System. Fernando added that Marcelo seemed to imitate Ana Rosa's actions, even taking Reiki classes shortly after learning she was also taking. According to the indictment, Ana Rosa told a friend that after starting energy harmonization therapy, she felt better and was able to improve her relationships with family members. She also planned to visit her son in Bolivia. However, as Ana Rosa's life improved, Marcelo became increasingly aggressive. Fernando reported that Marcelo once lashed out when Ana Rosa said women with positive attitudes could achieve their goals, he calling women idiots who would end up dying in a ditch. On the second day of the hearing, Claudio Bustamante, the police officer who took Marcelo's statement, testified. He told the jury that Marcelo had spontaneously confessed during the interrogation without any pressure from him. According to Bustamante, Marcelo stated that Ana Rosa had told him on Monday that she was no longer satisfied with him and was cheating on him, which made Marcelo angry and prompted him to hit her, although he couldn't remember what he used to hit her. On April 11th, the 11th Criminal Court's jury delivered its verdict, finding Marcelo Favio fair guilty of the murder of Ana Rosa Barrera. The sentence was life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 35 years, conditional on good behavior. Upon hearing the verdict, Ana Rosa's relatives burst into tears and shouted at Marcelo, labeling him as a murderer and wishing him to spend the rest of his life in prison. The prosecutor in charge of the case stated that the jury's decision aligned with the prosecution's request. The evidence showed that Marcelo Favio Fair had acted with full awareness and premeditation in planning Ana Rosa's murder. According to the prosecution, Marcelo's attempt to appear mentally unstable at the time of the crime was a tactic to evade the maximum sentence.